Like many other people around the world, I've watched the South Korean Netflix series Squid Game, and now I really, really want to talk about it. I actually remember seeing the trailer back in the day for when the series was announced, and I was really excited to watch the show since I'm a fan of like brutal, violent stories, but with a bit of thought behind them. But then I kind of forgot about the whole thing until the internet very politely and not at all in an intruding way reminded me that the show had been released, and I finally decided to watch it. I basically binged the show several times in just a few days because I was so fascinated by the characters and the stories. And since almost none of my friends or no one in my family have watched the show yet, I decided to make an overly long analysis on it and put it on YouTube. Anyway, this isn't going to be one of those, oh my god, this is the best show ever and you're an idiot if you haven't seen it yet kind of video essays. Naturally, I'm probably going to say mostly positive things about the show, but I'm not here to tell you that you're like missing out if you've never seen this before, or that you are an idiot for not liking the show. I'm just saying it's alright if you think that Squid Game isn't the best thing ever. Heck, even I don't think it is. I'm very well aware of the fact that there are many shows out there that are of similar and even better quality. So it's completely alright if you don't like the show as much as I did. I'm just here to tell you why I personally happen to like the show as much as I did. I mean, at this point the show is so popular that it has already reached the it's too overhyped status, and to be honest, I can kind of understand that. I mean, there have been many like shows and movies that have been like praised and overhyped over the years that I even have watched and thought they weren't good at all. So I'm I'm just saying it's okay. We all have our personal opinions. It's okay if you love the show but didn't like it as much as me. It's okay if you didn't love the show. It's okay. I mean, all of this is subjective anyway. Do I think the series is overhyped? Yeah, maybe a little bit. But I mean, there's also a reason why the show is as popular as it is, and I just want to take you on a journey and tell you about my thoughts on Squid Game as we go through the show episode by episode. Naturally, there are going to be spoilers, and I'm already going to apologize in advance for my Korean pronunciation. Squid Game was created, written and directed by Hwang Dong-hyuk, who, before the making of Squid Game, was known for films such as My Father, The Crucible, Miss Granny and The Fortress. He had the original idea for Squid Game in 2008, during a time when he himself was struggling financially. He spent his time in cafes reading Japanese manga such as Battle Royale, Gambling Apocalypse Kaiji and Liar Game, all of which addressed themes such as violence, surviving, money, etc., which he would later work into Squid Game as well. Hwang liked the idea of people getting involved in games of life or death, but thought they were perhaps too complicated and instead decided to focus on children's games for his own story. Even though Squid Game was initially thought to become a movie, Hwang still wanted the focus to be on characters, their relationships and society's impact instead of an action-heavy narrative. I wanted to write a story that was an allegory or fable about modern capitalist society, something that depicts an extreme competition, somewhat like the extreme competition of life. But I wanted it to use the kind of characters we've all met in real life. As a survival game, it is entertainment and human drama. The games portrayed are extremely simple and easy to understand, that allows viewers to focus on the characters rather than being distracted by trying to interpret the rules. Hwang tried to sell his story to multiple production groups, but was unsuccessful, since the premise was considered to be too bizarre and unrealistic. Thus, the idea for Squid Game disappeared for a while, until the 2010s, when Netflix shows had become really popular and the streaming service was looking for more prominent overseas production. They became interested in Hwang's story, and in 2019 it was announced that they would produce an original series, then titled Round 6. When his story was finally going to be realized into an actual production, Hwang felt it was strangely appropriate, saying, "It's a sad story, but the reason why I returned to the project is because the world 10 years from then has transformed to a place where these unbelievable survival stories are so fitting, and I found that this is the time when people will call these stories intriguing and realistic. Huang would take on the role of writer and director, a process which was quite stressful. Even though the original premise had now moved beyond its initial movie concept, the idea of writing 9 episodes of television proved to be a hard but rewarding undertaking. Writing Squid Game was harder than normal for me, as it was a series, not a film. It took me 6 months to write and rewrite the first 2 episodes. Then I consulted verbally with friends and picked up clues for improvements through my own pitching and from their responses. Huang's struggles and hard work have definitely paid off, in my opinion. I will go into more detail as we discuss the individual episodes, but I think the series not only manages to keep up a consistent theming, along with high quality writing in every episode, but the pacing is also outstanding, being able to mix social critique, violence, and personal relationships in a perfect way, so that you feel constantly invested in what is going on. The games are simple enough to understand and help to focus your attention more on the character's experience with those deadly games. I know that at the moment Huang doesn't have any plans for a second season of Squid Game, and to be honest, I don't necessarily need one, but I'm convinced he'd be able to develop the story and its concepts even further while staying true to the original. Now, when it came to casting, Huang already had 2 people in mind he wanted from the get-go. The first one, for the main character, Song Gi-hun, he got the model and actor Lee Jung-chae, who had previously played rather charismatic roles, but had that image, quote-unquote, destroyed by Huang. The second one he had had in mind for the role of Cho Sang-woo was the actor Park Hae-seo, probably best known for the 2017 series Prison Playbook. For some of the other characters, Huang specifically looked for less well-known actors in order to find the perfect fit. Finding good foreign actors was a hard task, but eventually they found Indian actor Anupam Tripathi, who could speak Korean fluently and was perfect for the innocent and emotional role of Ali Abdul. Finding an actress for the character of Kang Se-ryuk proved to be difficult as well, until Huang received an auditioning tape from Jung Ho-young. Originally a model, she had never taken on a major acting role before, but she was exactly the person Huang had been looking for, so she was cast as the North Korean defector. She received raving reviews for her performance, and quickly became a fan favorite for many viewers. Other actors featuring in major roles are Wee Ha-jun as policeman Hwang Chun-ho, Oh Young-soo as the old man Oh Il-nam, Hyo Sung-tae as the criminal thug Jung Dok-soo, and Kim Joo-young as the annoyingly outspoken Han Min-yo. Squid Game was released on Netflix on September 17, 2021, and has since then become the most watched program on the streaming platform, having attracted more than 142 million viewers within the first 28 days of its release. The show has received critical acclaim and currently stands on a 91% rating on Rotten Tomatoes and an 8.2 on IMDb. But enough about ratings and production history. Let's dive into the analysis as we begin with the first episode of Squid Game. Squid Game opens with an explanation of the titular children's game as we see a couple of kids playing it while an adult man explains the rules to the audience. What I love about this opening is that in retrospect, you realize how many things it already sets up that are going to be important later in the show. Naturally, the whole children's game theme is addressed right here, and given the show's title and this being the first game we see, we are shown right away that the Squid Game is going to play an important role at some point. Said kids game is an old classic played in Korea during the 70s and 80s and is played by 2 teams, offense and defense. The shape of the game board is reminiscent of a squid and is made up of circles, triangles and squares, 3 shapes that are constantly going to pop up throughout the show. We see the Squid Game is quite physical, with the kids pushing and shoving each other to gain the upper hand. It's said that if you lose or fail to comply with the rules, you die. A nice hint there which implies the deadly high-stakes concept we're about to see later. Even though it's never explicitly stated, I'm assuming the boy playing offense who we follow in this opening is Gi-eun as a child. The boy he directly fights could be his old childhood friend Sang-woo. It is mentioned in the last episode when the 2 men face off in the final challenge that they used to play this Squid Game when they were kids, so I'm thinking this is the opening indirectly showing us what the final confrontation is gonna boil down to. Following the opening credits, we are introduced to our main character, Song Gi-hun, a man in his late 40s living with his mother in a flat that obviously isn't very big or in any way fancy. The family very evidently struggled financially, with the mother being hesitant to entrust Gi-yoon with more money. Here we get the first impression of our protagonist, and to be totally honest, he starts out as a bit of a wanker. He argues with his mother, doesn't help with her work, and he even goes on to steal her credit card she is clearly trying to hide from him. Gi-yoon is even scolded by his friend later when he doesn't seem to remember his mother's birthday, and goes on to point out that she seems to care more about her grandchild, Gi-yoon's daughter, than her own son. We quickly realize that a major reason for the family's financial struggles is Gi-yoon himself, who is addicted to gambling. He bets on horses and loses at first, but eventually turns out to be quite lucky, as he wins 4.56 million won. I like that the number here already foreshadows the prize money for the Squid Game later. Another thing I enjoy about the whole gambling sequence and its aftermath is Gi-yoon's thinking and emotional process. On the rewatch, I felt oddly reminded of the VIPs who we see later in the show, who bet on the game contestants. Naturally, Gi-yoon is much more desperate and in actual need of money, but I think it's interesting to see how he thinks really hard about which horse to bet on, and once he wins, his whole attitude changes. He suddenly becomes cheery and generous, as he even gives the employee 10,000 won of his winnings. There's even a bit of humor there, as Gi-yoon, outside the gambling venue, talking to his daughter over the phone, lights up a cigarette and talks about going to a fancy restaurant, as if the money he's just won elevates him to an entirely different status, where he's allowed to act a little aloof. The confidence that comes with owning money gives him an air of superiority, but naturally, this doesn't last very long, as debt collectors approach him and Gi-yoon decides to cheat it. He accidentally runs into a young woman, and I love this little moment here because there was a bit of improv from Lee Chung-jae. Gi-yoon, being polite even though he's being chased by thugs, picks up the coffee the woman has dropped and even tries to put the straw back in before handing it to her. You can even see the actress giggling, but I like that they kept the outtake because it's a charming moment for Gi-yoon's character. Nevertheless, the thugs catch up to him and demand their payment. Gi-yoon wants to give them the money he's just won at the gambling venue, but realizes it was stolen from him by the woman he crashed into. He's beaten up by the thugs, and they make him sign a contract which gives him the right to remove body parts from him should he be unable to pay them back. In a way, this is a mini version of what we see transpire in the Squid Game later. Gi-yoon, quote-unquote, willingly signs a contract through which he gives up his physical well-being in order to be able to pay off his debts. Gi-yoon, now even more so desperate for money since he wants to surprise his daughter for her birthday, borrows 10,000 won and attempts to win her a prize at the claw machine. He ends up taking his daughter to a fast food place, and the present he got for her turns out to be a fake gun. But what's important about this scene is that we see here who Gi-yoon really is. Up until this point, he's been a bit of a loser and wasn't always very nice to people, but he's trying his best when it comes to his family, especially his daughter. He wants to be a good father to her, wanting to impress her and not give her the impression that he's struggling. He wants to be strong for her. This is an essential part of Gi-yoon's character, the compassion he has for others, especially the love he has for his family. He's keeping up this happy, easygoing facade for his daughter and promises he'll get her a better present for her next birthday. After bringing his daughter home to her mum, we see Gi-yoon waiting at a tube station where he encounters a mysterious businessman who makes him an unusual offer.
저랑 딱지치기를 하셔서 한 번 이기실 때마다 10만 원을 드리겠습니다.
Being hesitant at first, Gi-yoon eventually agrees, falling back into his old gambling habits. He loses the first round, and being unable to pay the businessman back, is slapped in the face instead. Again, we have the theme of physical harm being exchanged for money. We even hear the titular music of the Squid Game in this scene, indicative of the bigger game that is about to unfold. Even though he's shocked at first, Gi-yoon is too obsessed by the idea of winning, so he goes on to endure several more slaps to the face until he finally manages to win the game. What I like here is that Gi-yoon doesn't immediately ask for the money, but is instead so focused on paying the man back that he attempts to slap him. The physical payback has become more important than the initial goal, which is a theme we'll encounter multiple times throughout the show. Anyway, Gi-yoon is paid his 100,000 won, but the mysterious man seems to know about him. He goes on to point out that Gi-yoon is 415 million won in debt, and if he wishes to make more money by playing games, he should call him. Gi-yoon is handed a card with the familiar circle, triangle, square symbols and a telephone number on it. On his way home, he stops by at the food stall owned by the mother of a good friend of his, who we will meet very soon. As he walks home, Guillaume comes across a stray cat and, taking pity on it, gives it some of the fish he's just bought. The scene wasn't originally in the script, but put in off the suggestion in order to show Guillaume's sympathetic personality. I think this is a great little moment because it once again shows who Guillaume is. Even though he's been beaten up, signed away his organs, and struggles financially, he's willing to share the little bit of food he has because he can't bear to see another creature suffer. It demonstrates that, deep down, despite all of his problems, Guillaume is a good person who, despite not having much himself, still wants to help others. When he comes back home, he shows his mum the money he's made and talks about the meeting with his daughter. It is here that we learn that his daughter, along with his ex-wife and her new husband, is going to move to the US and he won't see his daughter anymore. This is where we get the ultimate motivation for Guillaume. His mother explains that if a father is able to financially provide for a child, he can get custody back. This is what causes Guillaume to call the number and join the game. Once again, we see what counts the most for him is the love for his daughter and the wish to be a good father to her. After signing up for the game, Guillaume is then picked up by a group of masked strangers who gas him and take him away. When Guillaume wakes up, he finds himself lying in a bed which is located in a giant warehouse filled to the brim with other beds stacked on top of each other. The wonderful art director of the show, Chae Kyung-sun, has said that she positioned the beds like that in order to represent modern society's competition to climb the ladder. The large dormitory space is designed with the keywords people who are abandoned on the road. The raised platform in the middle is designed to look like a tunnel entrance, and the walls are covered with white tiles which are commonly used in a tunnel. The beds are stacked up against one another like goods in a warehouse, and they are taken out as the participants get eliminated. When the mayhem breaks out, these beds collapse and get destroyed to look like broken ladders or stairs, which signify the hopeless reality of not being able to move upward. The people in this room are stacked like objects. They are no longer individuals. They are like the horses Guillaume bet on earlier. The fact that the players are stripped of their individuality becomes evident once you see that everyone is wearing green tracksuits, each with a number on them. Those tracksuits were inspired by the 1970s athletic wear and weren't actually that comfortable to wear for the actors because the material wasn't very breathable, and in a room filled with over 300 people, things got a little stuffy. Guillaume gets up and talks to an old man who counts all the participants because it helps him cope with his dementia and the tumor inside his head. We see that the old man was the first to arrive since he has the number 1, and that Guillaume turns out to be the final contestant with the number 456. Meanwhile, we see that the room and all the people inside are heavily monetized by several anonymous employees who are overseen by the front man, the person wearing the artsy black mask. As everyone tries to figure out what's going on, a fight is breaking out between two of the participants. Here we are introduced to two other important characters. The antagonist, Jung Dok-soo, a violent criminal with major aggression issues. The other person we've actually seen before. It's the woman who stole Guillaume's money. This is Kang Se-byuk, who, as we learned during this altercation, is originally from North Korea and was once associated with Dok-soo. The two get involved in a physical altercation, but then Guillaume steps in as he recognizes the woman who mugged him. While Guillaume is loud and accusatory in those moments, I like that we see here that, no matter the circumstances, he is never outright aggressive or punches back. When Dok-soo tries to hit him, Guillaume immediately goes into defensive mode, attempting to call the people responsible so they can de-escalate the situation. And indeed, the main doors open and several masked people wearing pink jumpsuits enter. The design of the employees is supposed to evoke the idea of ants in a colony. The slit down the middle of their masks is similar to an ant's face, and since all of them are wearing the same outfits, we get the impression that none of them are real individuals, but instead wheels inside of an engine whose job it is to work for the colony and the person in charge, and to never ask any questions. The only personal identifier are the symbols on their mask, the circles being basic employees, the triangle being soldiers, and squares representing supervisor ranks. The pink color of their jumpsuits is sort of childlike, which is in line with the theming of the games, but the color is also on the opposite side of green on the color wheel, which sets the employees visually apart from the participants inside the games. The two colors are also reminiscent of colors often used in Korean children's school supplies during the 70s and 80s. A neat little detail here is that the first workers we are introduced to are not armed or openly aggressive and are mostly the lesser circle employees. While odd, these employees don't seem threatening or dangerous to us yet. The employees make it pretty clear that everyone here signed up voluntarily, that they are fully aware of everyone's financial problems. The amount of prize money is unknown at this point, but the presentation of a giant piggy bank leaves enough to the imagination. Even though all the participants are unsettled by the general atmosphere, they are willing to stay and continue to sign a player consent form which states 3 rules. 1. A player is not allowed to stop playing. 2. A player who refuses to play will be eliminated. 3. Games may be terminated if the majority agrees. Even though it isn't clear yet at this point, Gi-yoon signs a contract which is very similar to the one he consented to earlier when he was confronted by the thugs. He signs over his body, his life in fact, and agrees to put himself into danger in return for money. The contestants are led away to play the first game. On their way, they walk through what is perhaps the most impressive and interesting looking set, namely the colourful staircase. The set was built to represent a maze and was inspired by the art piece Relativity by Dutch artist M.C. Escher, whose print showed several identical looking characters climbing different staircases, which seemed to be affected by multiple different types of gravity. The set was huge and could accommodate over 100 people at the same time. It's mostly coloured in pink, similar to the employees, thus creating a feeling of dread for the players. I think similar to the ladder imagery with the beds, these staircases show the ascent and descent the characters have to go through in order to receive the prize they signed up for. In order to get to the games where they can win the money and therefore a better status, they have to climb up the stairs. Once the games are over, they have to descend the stairs again and return to their original lower status, while they have to wait for the next opportunity to climb the social ladder. Production designer Chie Kyung-sung explained that this was intentional. I was inspired by 2 illustrations. One of them was an illustration of a child who's sitting next to a tall wall. Next to the child there is a ladder leaning against the wall, and the child is making a fire with some wood taken from the ladder while looking at the wall. During the process, I hope that art will help the show to deliver the questions that it intends to ask and the themes it intends to highlight. Even when making a single prop or deciding a finishing material for a certain set, I'll almost obsessively put in intentions behind them so they can contribute to the wider themes. The staircase that looks like the sides of the stairs also stems from the image of a ladder. The structural composition of a ladder and stairs is used heavily in the show. The maze-like stairways are done particularly well, and I'm glad that they are well received. Once the players are up the staircase, the participants are led outside onto a huge open field. It is here that Gi-yoon actually recognizes one of the players, his old childhood friend Cho Sang-woo, whose mother Gi-yoon had actually spoken to shortly before joining the game. Gi-yoon obviously seems to hold his friend in high regard, saying that Sang-woo was a gifted student who studied at Seoul National University. The creator of the show actually attended SNU in real life, and Sang-woo's actor would frequently ask about details he could use for his character. Sang-woo is currently 650 million won in debt, and seeing him here participating in such a ridiculous game seems to surprise Gi-yoon. We cut back to the frontman, who enters his office, where we can once again see the Squid Game symbol. He picks up the phone. We hear him speak English as he says that everything is prepared and the games can begin. The first game is finally announced. It turns out to be the children's game, Red Light, Green Light. At the very end of the playing field stands a statue of a giant girl which will conduct the game. Regarding the design of the first game, the art director explained, I wanted to fill the set for the first game with fantasy and fairy tale-like images. The robot doll was designed after one of the duos from the 80s textbook Chul-soo and Jung-hae, and an ominous tree was put in as an object. This juxtaposition evokes both the memories of childhood and the sense of fear at the same time. The walls are decorated with the fields of reeds and the clear sky, the kinds of which you would see in a storybook. But the fields and the clouds are not real, and once the game is over, the ceiling closes over the confused faces of the survivors and those who are dead. The game starts off relatively chill. The phrase the doll is saying, by the way, translates roughly into the day hibiscus bloomed, or the rose of Sharon has bloomed, which refers to Korea's national flower. When the girl turns back around, a young man is unable to stay still, and he is disqualified. A horrifying shot echoes across the playing field, and the man collapses. It quickly becomes clear that he has, indeed, been killed, and this realization sends everyone into a mad mass panic. People start to scream and run away, trying to get through the doors, but the doll only registers their movement, and all of the terrified contestants are shot down mercilessly. Huang chose Red Light Green Light as the first game because it could be played with a great number of people and thus allowed for many of the participants to be disqualified in one go. The rules of the game are very simple and familiar to viewers in many different countries. Therefore, Red Light Green Light allows for a shocking twist to take place, which the viewer can immediately understand and apply to the characters on screen. Once the shots have died down, we are left with at least half of the contestants killed and everyone else standing stock still in horror. Gion has actually been knocked over in the chaos and now has to attempt getting back up without getting spotted. The only player who seems to be unfazed by the horrible murders is the old man, who goes on to happily move forward. Motivated by the old man's enthusiasm, the others begin to play again as well, with Sang-woo giving Gion useful tips. We even get another moment where the rivalry between Deok-soo and Se-byok is explored, where we see that Se-byok is prepared to play dirty and push others down in order to reach her goal. There is somewhat of a heartbreaking moment for Gion when he has to abandon someone who latches onto him for help. I think this is a perfect moment of realization for our more or less innocent protagonist, who clearly feels pained by having to leave someone behind who is in need of his aid. As the contestants slowly but steadily make their way through the game, we see the frontman watching them, as we get the classic violence plus fancy music scene, which I personally never get tired of. The moment of shock happens when Gion trips over another contestant's corpse as the girl statue is about to turn around. Luckily, we see that he's been saved from falling over by another participant who's holding on to him. With the time running out, the two manage to cross the finish line just in time, as all the others who were unsuccessful are shot down. The last shot of episode 1 is a bird's view onto the playing field as a giant ceiling closes over it and the camera draws back, revealing that all the people are trapped on a remote island in the middle of nowhere. I absolutely love this first episode. I think writing a good first introductory episode of any series is the hardest thing to do, because a first episode has to do so many things. It has to introduce general world building and the premise of the series. It has to introduce the most important characters of the series, but at the same time it still has to tell an interesting story, so it has a lot of heavy lifting to do, and I think the first episode of Squid Game manages to do this quite well. Of course, I'm going to talk more about all of the other characters in detail later on, but just to say right here at the beginning, Gion is my favorite character of the show. He is this right mixture of kind-hearted, but he's also foolish and flawed. He's not the best of people, and I think this is like this perfect mixture of all different kind of character traits that make him a good protagonist that is, on the one hand, relatable, but on the other hand also really isn't, because we see that he is not always a good person. But what I like is that we, I think, get enough moments that show us that Gion deep down is a good person, or at least tries to do as best he can. The crushing weight of financial debt and the wish to support yourself, your friends, or your family, they're all very good reasons that help us to understand why Gion and all the other characters in the show would go on to enter such a deadly game. And it helps us all the more, I think, to be shaken to the core when we see all of these people, or most of the people, especially in this first episode, just get killed in cold blood. Red Light Green Light is a perfect introductory game in my opinion, because the physical and emotional stakes of this game are easy to understand and become quite clear to us early on. So at the very end, we're just as horrified as all the other leftover contestants, because we are wondering what the hell is going on here and how can they possibly survive what's coming next. The second episode of Squid Game opens with the immediate aftermath of Red Light Green Light, as we see the bodies having been put into coffins. The coffins look oddly adorable with the pink ribbons, which are reminiscent of the employees' jumpsuits. Art director Chae Kyung-soon imagined with the ribbons that the creator of the game would think that they had given the contestants a fair chance.
사람은 게임은 과연 어떤 심정일까에 포커스를 좀 맞췄던 것 같아요. 그래서 게임을 설계한 설계자는 이 참가자들에게 신처럼 기회를 줬다라고 생각을 한 것 같아요. 선물을 주는 거야. 너네들의 죽음과 너네들이 투각장에 버려지는 것까지도 나의 배려야 라고 하는 어떤 그런 마음을 상상하면서 그럼 선물 박스 리본으로 한번 가볼까?
주 색상이 검은색과 핑크색이어서 그걸 조합해서 블랙핑크 같은 느낌으로.
Meanwhile, we see the surviving contestants returning to the warehouse, where we are informed that 255 people have died in the first game, with 201 contestants surviving. In a response which I can only describe as a deeply human panic reaction coming from the will to survive, several players start to beg for their lives, asking to be let go and saying that they are going to pay off their debts. I like the realism of this moment because I honestly believe this is exactly what would happen in a situation like this. Forget about the reason you came here, forget about the prize money. You've just seen 255 people brutally shot to death right in front of you. You'd be scared for your life and trying to get out of the situation as quickly as possible. Sang-woo is eventually the one who remembers rule number 3, which allows for the games to be terminated if the majority agrees. Before the vote is being held, however, the prize money is finally announced. 100 million won are at stake for each player, meaning there are currently 25.5 billion won in the piggy bank. If you manage to survive all 6 games, 45.6 billion won could be yours. However, if they vote to terminate the game, none of the surviving participants would get anything, and all the money would go to the grieving family members of those who have died in the games. I love the image of the contestants staring up at the piggy bank. They're constantly looking up at it, and it's the only thing in the room that is always lit up. Like a god they pray to, the prize money constantly hovers above the contestants, and they're doing everything they can in order to get to it. They are slaves to the god of money that looks down on them. The vote commences, and it's closer than you would think. Gi-eun, Ali, the man who had saved him earlier, and Dok-soo vote to terminate the game, whereas Sep-yeok and Sang-woo vote to continue playing. Here we have a proper look at how the contestants in this game are driven by their need and desire for money. Before they knew of the prize money, most of them seemed prepared to immediately cancel the games, but once they were made aware of the huge sum, their old instincts kicked back in. They are prepared to literally risk their lives if it meant they earned a big enough amount of money. This is a core theme which not only serves as the motivation for almost all the characters within the show, but it will also continue to influence many other aspects of the story. The final vote is down to the old man. Whatever he chooses will determine whether or not the games are going to continue. After a moment of suspense, the old man chooses to terminate the games. The contestants are sent home, but with the information that they will be allowed to come back and continue playing should the majority of them wish to return to the games. We see Sang-woo and Ali being released back in Seoul, and this is where we see the two connect for the first time. Sang-woo buys them both food and lets Ali use his phone to call his family. When Ali says he's gonna walk all the way back home, Sang-woo insists on giving him money for a bus ticket. In contrast to what we see of Sang-woo later, this interaction shows that he isn't truly cold-hearted and that he is prepared to help others. However, for him this comes from a sense of obligation. Sang-woo is well educated and considers himself to be of an elite status, which makes him act altruistically to keep up appearances.
상우가 그렇게 차가운 사람만이 아니라는 것이 드러나는 유일한 씬이기도 하고요. 그럼에도 불구하고 상우는 상우다라는 것도 이 안에 있다고 생각했거든요.
저도 그래서 참 이 장면이 좋았던 게 이타적인 것 같은데 친구들을 어떻게 대할 것인가 그거에 대해서 되게 얘기를 많이 했었고 사실 더 배려를 많이 하고 배운 사람으로서라는 입장이 있지 않을까. 이 장면이 되게 중요한 장면인데 저한테는
기다렸다가 버스 타고 가요.
스스로도 아직도 망했지만 노블리스 오블리제 같은 느낌을 가지고 있는 아직도 난 도덕적으로 올바른 사람이어야 얘들보다 내가 더 우월하니까 뭐 이런 마음들이 좀 녹아있는 상우의 그런 두 가지 모습이 다 담겼으면 좋겠다고 생각을 했고 그런 느낌으로 연기를 해주셨어요.
The younger man is clearly thankful, even though it makes Sang-woo somewhat uncomfortable, and the two men part ways. For now. Coming back to our protagonist. Once Gi-eun finds himself back in his normal life, he goes to the police and lets them know of the murderous game he was forced to play. Naturally, none of the officers think he's telling the truth, but one of the officers actually seems to be interested in his story, as we will see later. Gi-eun then arrives back at his place, but finds his mother is missing. He decides to go into town, where he comes across Sang-woo, who seems to be hiding from his mother. The two men get to talking, and Sang-woo reveals that he's actually 6 billion won in debt. Gi-yoon seems to be totally thrown off by that, not understanding how Sang-woo, who's always been such a highly educated and successful man, could be in such deep troubles. There seems to be a general misunderstanding for Gi-yoon, and I think this perfectly demonstrates the differences between these two characters. Gi-yoon is a little naive, thinking that financial struggles are caused by quote-unquote simple things, and that Sang-woo shouldn't be struggling this much since he's clearly of a different caliber. But Sang-woo's financial struggles aren't the same as Gi-yoon's. They run deeper and are more severe than one might think. Sang-woo is involved in some dark, legal stuff, but he feels that someone like Gi-yoon wouldn't understand that. The two men stand on complete opposite ends, and that rift is only going to become bigger as the show goes on. Gi-yoon then receives a call, and he finally learns of his mother's whereabouts. She's been staying at a hospital because she has developed severe symptoms of diabetes and will need treatment as soon as possible. The mother checks herself out, but Gi-yoon wants her to stay at the hospital, insisting they'd use insurance for her treatment, but she reminds him that he's used her insurance for money before, and now they are unable to give her the medical attention she needs. Meanwhile, we see the officer, Detective Hwang Chun-ho, looking for his missing brother, and he finds the familiar calling card in his brother's flat, which he had previously seen at the police station when Gi-yoon was there. During this time, Ali has returned to his workplace and confronts his employer who has been holding back his salaries. Prepared not to back down this time, Ali confronts his boss, but the two get into an argument which escalates into Ali accidentally injuring his employer brutally and stealing the money he was owed. Fearing that the police will come after him and his family, Ali talks to his wife and tells her to leave along with their child and get themselves to safety until he can make more money and join them. In the meantime, Seo-byuk is negotiating with a man who's supposed to help her get her family out of North Korea. Her brother's already in South Korea and currently staying at a children's home. She's told to bring more money, and she threatens the man with a knife, warning him not to screw her over again once she's brought the money to him. Coming back to Sang-woo, we see him alone on the phone talking to his mother. She still believes that he's away on a business trip, and generally doesn't seem to know of any of the struggles he's facing. Sang-woo is clearly depressed, and once the call is done, he stands up, picks up his jacket, and then walks into the bathroom. This is rock bottom for Sang-woo. We see him lying in the full bathtub as charcoal is burning next to him. Committing suicide like this via carbon monoxide poisoning is, unfortunately, quite common in many Asian countries. The act of Sang-woo putting on his jacket before entering the bathroom is a clever little detail, since it shows who he is.
아마 그때 찍다가 그냥 생각이 난 것 같아요. 상우가 재킷을 벗어놓고 엄마한테 전화를 원래 그대로 들어가려고 했는데 상우는 그렇게 죽을 것 같지가 않고 다시 옷을 다 차려입고 가장 자기가 완벽하다고 생각하는 모습으로 죽을 것 같다는 생각이 들었어요. 현장에서 만들어서 넣었던 생각이 나요.
제 입장에서 보면은 되게 불쌍하잖아요. 자켓을 입는 행위가 되게 아이러니하더라고요. 그래서 저도 그걸 보고서 좀 이상했었던 기분이 들었던 것 같습니다.
차마 말 못하는 무언가와 말 없이 상우의 마음을 좀 상상하게 만드는 그런 장면을 한번 만들어보고 싶었어요.
As he prepares to face death, the doorbell rings. Sang-woo, drenching wet, answers the door, but all he finds is the familiar calling card with the circle, triangle, and square symbols. Quickly checking in here with the ever-charming Duk-soo. He thinks he's got a plan to infiltrate and beat down the people who organized the game, but things aren't going as smoothly as he thinks. In fact, one of his old fellow gang members sells him out to another gang. Duk-soo, after brutally stabbing his former friend to death, manages to escape his attackers by jumping off a bridge into a river. Returning to Gi-yoon, after failing to receive any financial aid from his friend, he happens to run into the old man. The two get to talking, the old man telling Gi-yoon that he's currently staying at a friend's place because he doesn't have anywhere else to go. The old man lets him know that he's decided to go back to the games, since he doesn't have long to live anyway, and refuses to just sit around and do nothing. He's realized that real life isn't any better than those horrible games. In fact, it's even worse. Basically, he's got nothing to lose, so why not risk your life to try and win some money? In retrospect, I find this scene to be quite fascinating, since if you rewatch the show, you know that the old man is actually the host of the games, and in fact already possesses a huge fortune. You wonder if any of the things he says during this conversation are real. I don't think it's a coincidence that Gi-yoon ran into the old man. In the very last episode, the old man says that he had so much fun playing the games because Gi-yoon was a wonderful partner to play with. I wonder if the old man picked out Gi-yoon to approach him and coax him back into playing the game because he wants his favorite player back. Which sounds kinda nice, but then again you could also interpret it as him being a manipulative rich guy who's talking a struggling man into participating in a game of life and death that he's helped organize for other people's entertainment. I guess it comes down to personal interpretation, but in retrospect many of the old man's interactions take on a new connotation. Anyway, things aren't going well for Guillaume. His desperate need for money becomes more and more evident as he eventually sees himself forced to ask his ex-wife for financial aid. She refuses strongly, even more so when he begs her to ask her new husband for help. Guillaume leaves as the rest of the family, including his daughter, show up, but he is stopped by his ex-wife's new partner. At first it seems like he genuinely wants to help Guillaume as he offers him money, but it quickly turns out that it's more of a bribe because Guillaume can only have the money if he stops seeing his daughter. This is one of the few times we see Guillaume being outright aggressive as he punches the other guy straight in the face. He then utters a line which I think is fundamental to Guillaume's character. While money would indeed solve many of his problems, he still makes a point of emphasizing that human relationships and the love for his family are more important than any money in the world. I think this also serves as a subtle hint as to what happens to Guillaume at the very end, when he's won the prize money, but is arguably struggling even more than before. Money won't be able to fix any emotional damage, and it won't fix the fact that his own daughter just saw him deck her stepdad right in front of her. Just like all the other characters we've seen up until this point, Guillaume has now also reached his lowest point. Rain is pouring down on him as he makes his way home. It's here that he is approached by Detective Huang, who has seen Guillaume holding onto the same strange calling card as the one he found at his brother's flat, and now he wants to know if Guillaume knows what happened to his brother. Guillaume, however, isn't in a mood to talk to him, pretending he came up with the entire Death Game story. And he utters a heavy statement which sums up the helplessness he feels right now.
죄송한데요. 제가 지금 누굴 도울 수 있는 처지가 아닙니다.
If there's anything that demonstrates why Guillaume decides to return to the Squid Game, it is that line. He's unable to help himself. He can't give his mother the medical attention she so desperately needs, and he's potentially lost the respect of his daughter, who he can't provide for either. The life out here doesn't provide anything good for him anymore. He can't do anything to make it better, and no one benefits from him staying around. So when Guillaume finds another calling card in the door to his flat, it isn't at all surprising when he decides to return to the games. The last thing we see is a montage of all of our main characters waiting by themselves to be picked up by the game's employees. They're all lost and desperate and got nothing to lose. They all enter the cars with a depressing sense of defeatism. They're all gassed once again, except for Sebyok, who is able to stay conscious. The last thing we see is Detective Huang Chun-ho following one of the mysterious vans. I think the second episode is one of the most highly discussed among the viewers, because people argue that they maybe don't entirely understand why you would keep this episode in here. If all the players by the end of the episode decide to return to the games, why have this episode in here at all? Personally, I think it's quite clever to have an episode set outside of the games, because it shows us how all of these characters live and what their true reasons are for returning to the games. Like, instead of simply having the characters tell us later on in the warehouse during like a normal conversation with the other contestants, where they just like tell the other characters in the audience basically why they're here, what their outside lives are like, we get the chance to see them actually live their lives in this episode. All these characters are desperate beyond belief. They literally have nothing to lose anymore. Like, they are at this point where they're saying to themselves, I might as well sign up for a game of life and death with the chance to win some money if I happen to win with a bit of luck, but because there's literally nothing else they can do. Like the title of the episode says, their lives are hell. The games at this point aren't any worse than the lives they would be living outside of the games. All of these characters are desperate, but for very different reasons. Like, some of them wish to take care of their families, some people are literally at the point of death if they're not able to get some money. Some people are in danger of being imprisoned. Some people are in danger of losing family members. They all have their reasons. I mean, like the old man says, if you know that your life isn't worth anything anymore, you might as well risk it to get some money out of it. Personally, I also think that the termination of the games is the most realistic reaction that people in such a scenario would have, because that's just the human instinct to survive. The moment that they realize that they die when they lose these games, you would just freak out. Your mind would immediately go into survival mode and you would think, I need to get out of here ASAP. So of course most of the people would vote, let's terminate the games. But I think it's just as equally realistic to see why most of these characters return to the games at the very end, because they all have a very unhealthy relationship with money, naturally. To them, money is almost like this benevolent god. They think money can fix all of their problems. So I think this episode does a perfect job at helping us to understand how each of these characters works deep down and what their motivations are for playing these games. And the episode also does a lot of clever foreshadowing when it comes to the fate of most of our main characters. Like, Gyun returns home, but his mother isn't there. Sang-woo ends up killing himself. Se-byok threatens someone with a knife. Later on, she is killed by having her throat cut. We see Deok-soo jumping off a bridge, which is how he dies later on. And we see Ali getting screwed over by his employer, which is how he will die in episode 6. Thus, the second episode not only shows us how each of the contestants will fare in the game, it also helps us to understand what motivates each of these people deep down to put their lives on the line to win that prize money. The third episode immediately continues with the events from the previous episode as we see Detective Hwang following the vans which are boarding the ferry. He manages to stealth onto one of the cars, which are then checked by the guards. It is here where we learn that all the contestants have been equipped with some kind of tracking chip which they can scan in order to check for player registration. We also hear the frontman later telling the guards to keep an eye on those who didn't return. I think this is a rather serious implication not a lot of people have thought about. Even if you decide not to return, or if you're lucky manage to win the game organizers will always keep an eye on you. We see in episode 1 that they have monitored the players before they had even signed up, so can you imagine how scary and daunting this constant sense of observation must be if you found out that they are able to find you whenever they want? I'd bet that they keep an eye on all former players in order to see if the opportunity ever comes up again to coax them into playing another game. They would know about your financial situation, your family and friends, your whereabouts. They'd know everything that gain control over you and manipulate you into entering the game. Anyway, Detective Hwang manages to overpower one of the guards and takes over his role within the employee system. He is now a man on the inside. Fun fact, the detective story wasn't originally part of Hwang Dong-hyuk's story.
는 원래 제가 영화 대본을 썼을 때는 없었어요. 게임 넣기도 2시간이 벅차서, 근데 이걸 시리즈로 만들기로 하고 생각을 했을 때 좀 더 많은 이야기를 할 수 있는 이제 자유가 주어져서 생각을 해낸 캐릭터입니다. 형을 찾아서 단서를 쫓다 보니까 결국 이 섬 안에까지 들어가게 되는 캐릭터를 만들었고요. 사람의 눈으로 이 분홍색 핑크 가면인들의 세계를 보여주고, 또 그 너머에 있는 부리고 조종하는 사람들에까지도 게임의 본질에 좀 더 다가가는, 그래서 탄생한 게 준호라는 형사 캐릭터입니다.
He also intended to highlight the problems of inactivity that often come up in police service, saying, I think the issue with police officers is not just an issue in Korea. I see it on the global news that the police force can be very late in acting on things. There are more victims or a situation gets worse because of them not acting fast enough. It was an issue that I wanted to raise. The players are brought back into the warehouse area. As they are being dressed, we see a still conscious Se-byok sneaking in a small knife, which will be important later. we learn that 187 contestants have returned, which is a re-entrance rate of 93%. The interesting thing here is that the first thing everyone does is strengthening alliances and forming groups. This is another smart but realistic reaction, I think. The people here now know what they signed up for. They're starting to play strategically. We all know that there is strength in numbers, so naturally you would start to team up. Gyun teams up with Sang-woo and Ali and the old man. The most threatening group is clearly the one Deok-soo has managed to put together, since he's basically trying to start another gang. We're going to learn more about Deok-soo later on, but I think it's already quite clear that he likes to act as the strong man, and he does so by being loud, aggressive, and he inflates his ego by surrounding himself with a bunch of yes-sayers who seem just as intimidating as him. One of those yes-sayers is supposed to be Se-byok, who he tries to invite to his group, but she rightfully refuses. Instead, we get another woman, Han Min-yo, who might be the most annoying and still funniest character in the entire series. She's a loud-spoken, manipulative woman who simply hangs on to the strongest contestant in order to survive. She quickly understands that joining Deok-soo's group would be the safest thing to do, so she does all she can in order to get him to warm up to her. Min-yo proves to be just as annoying as we thought her to be, because during the night she decides to keep everyone from getting some proper sleep by screaming her lungs out because she can't hold her bloody way in for just one blimmin' night. After a bunch of absurd statements, she is allowed to go to the bathroom, but Se-byok uses the opportunity as well and goes with her. We see that Min-yo has smuggled in a lighter and cigarettes, whereas Se-byok uses her knife to open up an entrance to the ventilation system. Min-yo plays interference during what might be the most hilarious, cringy, and ridiculous scene in the whole series, as she pretends to have indigestion in order to keep the guard out of the bathroom while Se-byok is taking a look around. Speaking of which, she doesn't catch much, but gets a glimpse into the kitchens where she sees a bunch of guards preparing some kind of sugar mixture. While the whole scene doesn't do much regarding the overall plot, I like that it gives the audience A chance to guess what the next game is going to be, and B gives us a little bonding moment between two unlikely characters. I was actually hoping that this scene would lead to Se-byok and Min-yo forming some kind of odd but mutually beneficial partnership, since they are both weird outsiders but could help each other out in different situations. I guess it would have been nice to see Min-yo not just being an annoying screaming woman all the time. Or it could have been interesting to see how two characters who are known for playing a little dirtier and manipulatively would try to benefit from each other, while also trying to defeat one another. But alas, Min-yo isn't much of a thinker and Se-byok is a lone wolf, so the two don't end up doing much together, except for Se-byok telling Min-yo about what she saw. However, someone overheard them. In the morning, we see everyone enjoying their less than impressive breakfast. The one thing of note here is that we see one of the contestants, player 111, finding a piece of paper in his food which seems to contain some kind of useful information. Afterwards, the players are led once more up the pink staircase. It is here that we learn that Sang-woo was the one who overheard Se-byok during the night, and he promises to help her out if she can provide him with useful information. The contestants are brought to a giant playground where they must make a choice between 4 shapes: triangle, circle, star, and an umbrella. None of the main characters seem to recognize the game they are about to play, except for Sang-woo, who has a sudden flashback to a childhood memory. He clearly knows what the game is going to be, but this is where we see Sang-woo's true character throughout the contest kicking in. He plays it strategically, and only to his own benefit. He suggests the group should split up, each choosing a different shape, and naturally he gives himself the easiest one, the triangle. There's a hint of regret coming through as he sees that Gyun, his friend since childhood, chooses the most difficult shape, the umbrella. He even tries to stop him, but decides differently. Sang-woo's actor has said that he considers this a very important moment for his character, and I think he's absolutely right.
장면을 한번 만들어보고 싶었어요.
모든 캐릭터에도 다 그런 섬세한 라인들이라고 그럴까요? 좀 쉼표라든지 연결되는 라인들이 좀 있어요. 게임 와중에 기훈이 형을 부르고 아니야 라고 얘기하는 그런 어떤 대사 씬이 있는데 기훈이 형 아니야. 그게 전체적으로 저한테는 굉장히 큰 씬이었고 그게 어떤 흐름으로 가는지에 대해서도 이제 감독님이랑 얘기를 많이 나눴던 그런 기억이 있고
재수도 없이 제일 어려운 거.
어떤 게임인지 모르고 선택하는 상황.
근데 상우는 그걸 얘기해줘야 되나 말아야 되나 사실 조금 고민을 합니다.
파이팅 이게 참 굳이
꼭 자기한테 필요한가? 머릿속에 많은 계산을 하는.
Here we see how Sang-woo is going to play from now on. He plays it smart, strategically, and with the outcome that best serves him. I think the little moment with Gi-yoon is also interesting in retrospect if we consider that Gi-yoon later, after he sees Sang-woo kill someone in order to win, asks him if Sang-woo would have done it if it had been him. Because in my opinion, he's kind of already done it. This moment right here shows that. He knows that Gi-yoon is most likely going to die if he lets him choose the umbrella, but he stays quiet. He doesn't kill him directly, but he sends him knowingly into a situation that all but guarantees death. Sang-woo isn't doing this whole game thing for anyone but himself, and he doesn't rely on others except for stepping on them in order to get ahead. This is the first glimpse at the calculated Sang-woo who plays to win and nothing else. After everyone's chosen their shape, the second game is finally revealed. Honeycombs. The contestants must pick at a stamped shape from a Dalgona using a needle without breaking it within a time limit. And here's one of my favorite moments, when the camera zooms in on Gi-yoon as he realizes that he is absolutely screwed. The Dalgona they used was specifically made by an expert who constantly worked on set so that the actors could all be provided with enough honeycomb. The candy has regained great popularity thanks to the show, and you can even try and make it yourself because the ingredients are nothing else than sugar and baking soda. Naturally, the production designer for the show built another fantastic set for this game, which was, once again, constructed with specific connotations in mind. The participants are asked to take on the honeycomb challenge like the children in the 70s and 80s who gathered in small groups in the playground to play the game. They must have played the honeycomb game as a child, so they are invited to immerse themselves in the old childhood memories. In the past, the playground was where they played with friends and had fun, but now it has turned into a space for a deadly game. I'm sure that everyone has the experience of looking at the playground as an adult and thinking that the playground equipment looks so much smaller than what it looked like as a child. That experience of changes in scale is a defining element in the set design for the second game. The objects in the playground, such as a slide, swing, and merry-go-round, are magnified threefold in size, and the walls are decorated with the crayon cloud drawings to add childlike and fairy tale-like touches. The game proceeds with Sang-woo getting on well, while Gi-yoon is just desperately trying not to break his umbrella. We see that Min-yo has managed to sneak in her lighter, which she uses to heat up her needle. I do have to wonder if the guards really can't see her doing that, or if this is one of those instances where you start to realize that the fairness that is so heavily emphasized isn't actually that important. Min-yo passes, and gives the lighter to Dok-soo in another move to gain his favor. We see the mysterious player 111, who seems to have known the game ahead of time, passing, but instead of the warehouse, he's being led somewhere else by one of the guards. With time running out and Gi-yoon literally sweating to death, our protagonist has a revelation. A drop of sweat falls into the honeycomb, and Gi-yoon realizes that he can melt down the sugar in order to remove the shape easier. And in a move that is absolute genius, Gi-yoon starts licking the honeycomb. Honestly, that's just street smart, and I absolutely love it. Creator Hwang Dong-hyuk included this move in order to show how desperate Gi-yoon is. He doesn't care about looking silly. It is also a method Hwang used for this game when he was playing it as a kid.
선배님도 진짜 많이 핥으셨죠, 이거 계속.
이렇게까지 핥아야 되나?
저게 제가 어릴 때 쓰던 방법이었거든요. 제일 어려운 저 우산을 뽑아가기 시작해서 뽑기 아저씨를 엄청나게 당황시켰던 그 전설의 방법입니다, 저게. 근데 저는 사실 걱정을 많이 했어요. 이걸 하라고 하면 좋아하실까? 그걸 아무리 그래도 난 이 정도인데 이걸 괜찮으셨어요?
아니 처음 볼 때는 조금 그랬죠. 다른 방법은 없나? 그런데 이제 기운의 절실함을 표현할 수 있는 어떤 그런 행동으로서는 너무 적합해서 더 열심히 했죠.
제가 이거 되나 안 되나 그 촬영 전날 호텔에서 이거 몇 개 갖다 달라고 계속 호텔 방에서 혼자 핥았어요. 되더라고요, 정말.
돼요?
몇 분간 핥으니까 되더라고요.
I also like the shot of Gi-yoon's face we get the second he realizes he's won the game. That expression of utter relief, anxiety and dread is painfully strong as Gi-yoon just has a short moment where he breaks down after narrowly escaping death. Following the game, the losers are about to be executed as one of them manages to take one of the guards hostage. He wants them to reveal their face, and he sees that the guard is but a young lad. Overcome by desperation, the contestant kills himself. The guard doesn't fare much better because the frontman comes marching in and shoots him straight down, saying,
명심해. 우리가 누군지 알게 되면 죽는다.
A I find the whole concept behind the gods' anonymity and how they are recruited to be quite fascinating. I've seen people argue the gods might be former contestants, and honestly that does kind of make sense considering who the frontman turns out to be later. The gods are completely removed from the players, they have no individuality, they are all basically objects as well. Like the ants they represent, they have to do nothing else but work, and you're not allowed to question anything and ever show a glimpse of independence. It's in fact a demonstration of personality which gives the incognito detective Huang trouble throughout the episode, but it is now that he uses the hostage situation to his advantage. The god who was killed had been suspicious of him, and they were wearing a square mask, meaning they were one of the superiors. Detective Huang manages to acquire their mask, and now he has the advantage of representing a higher authority. What I like about episode 3 is that, just like the characters, we as the viewer already feel a sense of familiarity when we return to the gaming venue. I think it's good that this third episode don't spend like too much time on like discussions between the characters where they talk about what their life was like on the outside or why they have decided to return. So this is why I think also episode 2 was so effective, because we got all the reasoning. We don't need to hear any kind of further explanation, and we can jump straight back into it with episode 3. I really enjoyed the team building in this episode because it helps us to understand our main characters even better, and this also opens up the possibility for different kinds of character interactions, since they all have decided to like play it strategically as a group. We see how Sang-woo has basically already kind of betrayed the group at this point, so it's going to be interesting to see how he's going to keep up like this little community he has started to build for himself here. And as the viewer, I think we're getting involved in these characters, and we're enjoying kind of seeing these characters making friends, but especially we as the viewers, I think we're starting already to realize here that not all of these people will make it. Most of these people will be dead by the end of the show. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of those group dynamics will be tested as the story goes on. The second half of the episode is dedicated to Detective Huang infiltrating the guard system, so we get to see what like the going-ons behind the scenes are. And I think it was a fantastic idea to include the detective character, because while it might not have like a big impact on the story on like the overall story maybe, or on the story of the contestant specifically, we get a chance to see how the games are organized and what's actually going on behind the scenes. I don't even want to imagine what like the emotional and psychological pressure for this job is like. Like Detective Huang's job theoretically now is he needs to imprison people, he needs to monitor those people 24/7, and he has to kill people theoretically without any questions asked, and none of the guards are ever allowed to make any connections with other guards or players. So if we ever do get a second season, I would love for it to be like focused on the guards and the organizers of the game, because I think it'd be fascinating to find out why these people are there, how they even got these jobs in the first place, if they are just as troubled as the players are. Just like, get me more background information on these guards. I want to know. I know there's word out there that a possible second season would perhaps focus more on like the guards and especially the frontman, and I think that would be a very good choice. We'll find out more about the frontman later on in this analysis, but for now I think we have like a good mixture between like, you know, the drama of the life and death game and seeing how the contestants deal with each other, and Detective Huang sort of just trying to find out what is actually going on behind the scenes. The fourth episode opens with Gyun, who's being led back to the warehouse, having a flashback to Sang-woo shortly before the game. He seems to realize that Sang-woo had guessed what the game was going to be and tried stopping him from choosing the umbrella, but then decided to stay quiet. However, when our main characters reunite and Sang-woo apologizes for splitting up the group, Gyun says it's alright, saying,
미안해. 괜히 내가 다 찢어지자고 해서.
아니야.
알고 그런 것도 아닌데 우산도 내가 고른 거고.
Gyun gives Sang-woo the benefit of the doubt here, even though he seemingly knows that Sang-woo lied. Here we see one of Gyun's major character traits. He trusts people. He trusts in their inherent goodness. This is a core element of how Gyun perceives others and how he approaches the games. He wants to believe in people. He wants to believe that people are willing to do good if given the option, and they are allowed to make mistakes if they didn't intend to do any serious harm. I do have to wonder about Sang-woo here, though. How sincere do you think his apology is? You could argue, since it's still early in the game, Sang-woo hasn't reached his full antagonist level yet, and honestly tries to apologize here for tricking his friends, without them directly knowing that, of course. But then again, if we think back to when Sang-woo helped out Ali, which was more of an act to keep up appearances, Sang-woo's apology could serve a similar purpose. Sang-woo doesn't truly intend to apologize, he just wants to take the moral high ground and feel like he did the right thing. He doesn't mean it, but that is what's expected of a decent person, so he apologizes in order to clear his conscience. You're welcome to interpret this little moment in different ways, but I think it's interesting because with Sang-woo, you can never be too sure. Following the second game, the prize money now consists of 34.8 billion won. The contestants are given food, with Deok-soo and his gang queuing twice, which leads to not every player getting a meal. One of the participants gets angry and attacks Deok-soo, but naturally he has no chance and ends up being kicked to death by Deok-soo. I find Gyun's reaction here to be quite interesting. He's absolutely outraged and tries to get the gods to do something about Deok-soo, but nothing happens. Gyun simply can't believe with how much carelessness and easiness human life is disregarded in these games. A man was murdered by another player. As if the deadly games weren't bad enough already, now the participants start killing each other as well. This isn't normal, but at this point everyone kinda acts like it is. Gyun calls out the utter brutality and negligence of human life, looking directly into one of the security cameras in order to address the people responsible. A man was murdered, and this should be a significant and tragic event. But it isn't. Not while you're in this environment. All that happens is the guards carrying in the coffin, the piggy bank is filled with the appropriate 100 million won, the set value for every player. We can immediately see how several people, especially Deok-soo and his lackeys, are taking this as a new incentive. They now realize, I don't have to play another game if I just murder all the other contestants. We found out later the participants were given less food on purpose in order to initiate a riot during the night. So much for keeping things clean and fair. Meanwhile, we finally see what's going on with player 111. Turns out he's part of an illegal organ harvesting business conducted by some of the guards. Player 111 is a doctor and helps them to remove organs from contestants who have died in the games, and in return he's told which game he has to play next. The dog is told to keep to the strongest group during the nightly ride, and he joins Deok-soo's group after letting him know about the game information he has received in advance. Our main characters also decide to prepare for the night, saying they should all meet up if fighting breaks out. Gyun also goes to invite Se-byok, seeing that she is all by herself. She declines, saying she doesn't trust people.
난 사람 안 믿어. 이런 데까지 기어들어온 인간들은 더 못 믿고.
그게 네가 나한테 할 소리냐?
Here we see one of Se-byok's core character traits throughout the first half of the show. She's a lone wolf. She's always done everything by herself and doesn't want to rely on anyone because relying on other people has only brought her pain in the past. But Gyun points out that the whole point of putting your trust in someone is that you then have someone you can lean on. You don't have to be by yourself if people offer to support you. It's okay to accept other people's help. You don't always have to endure everything on your own. We see the guards preparing for what is called the special game. They incited the upcoming riot on purpose in order to eliminate a number of weak players before the next game. A plan which, according to a friend of mine, is bullshit because you might as well not have any games at all if everyone killed each other. And you know what, point taken. It certainly completely invalidates the fairness which is constantly emphasized by the game organizers. But then again, we realize while watching the show that that's kind of the point. The organizers of the games preach equality and fairness, but we all know that isn't true. As the nightlights descend upon the warehouse, Deok-soo and his gang immediately move out and start an absolute murder spree. As if the murderous violence wasn't stressful enough, the frontman also gives the command for flashing lights to aggressively flicker in the warehouse. The whole scene has basically become a slasher nightmare. Our gang of main characters manages to find themselves in all the chaos, but the old man is missing. Se-byok manages to escape Deok-soo's attack and joins Gyun and the gang, deciding to trust his invitation. Then, We finally see the old man. He's absolutely terrified, standing atop one of the highest bunk beds, and he screams for the violence to stop. Following this proclamation, the frontman decides to call off the massacre and sends in the guards. Keep this in mind. Towards the end of the video, we're going to come back to that moment. In the end, 27 people died during the midnight riot, meaning there are only 80 contestants left. Detective Wang, still disguised as a guard, takes the opportunity to inquire about his brother and asks Gi-yun if he's heard of a man named Hwang In-ho. However, Gi-yun says that they don't know each other's names. This moment actually prompts him to, once our little gang is back together, propose to exchange names in order to strengthen the group's bond. It is here that we actually hear Se-byok's name for the first time, and we learn that Ali is from Pakistan. The old man has some trouble remembering his name, but Gi-yun calms him down, saying it'll come back to him later. Meanwhile, Dak-soo seems to be happy with all the carnage, and his ego continues to be bigger than everyone else's, especially when Minyo flirts with him and the two end up having an intimate heart-to-heart in the toilet. The one thing I find interesting here is that Minyo is totally in control of the situation, and Dak-soo doesn't even seem to realize it. She promises him that she will kill him if he should ever betray her.
덕수 씨, 나 배신하면 죽일 거야.
Dak-soo seems completely oblivious to Minyo's true intentions and plays it off, a decision which will come back to bite him. Eventually, the players are led to the third game. They enter an eerie in-between space, which is something of an endless white void. It's almost like a different dimension, completely set apart from all other areas. And naturally, whenever a new set is introduced, the ever-wonderful art director Jia Kyung-sun had something specific in mind. The waiting area is colored white to convey the feeling of extreme fear the participants feel when they are put in the middle of the complete unknown. The color shows that this space is where the participants are forced to wait without knowing what the next game is and what lies ahead. It is in this dooming void of white nothingness that the players are informed that the next game is going to be played in groups of 10. Sang-woo, once again, wants to play it strategically, saying that they should all look for strong men to join their group, since it's more likely that they will be better at the upcoming game. Gi-yun, Ali, and Sang-woo all manage to find capable men, whereas Se-byok invites a young woman named Ji-young, who was all by herself. The old man wasn't able to get anyone for their team, which means they're now one person short. But turns out, Dak-soo did the exact thing he shouldn't have done. He abandoned Minyo. Furious as she is, she reminds him of her promise to kill him, and simply moves on to join Gi-yun's group without an invitation. Sang-woo is visibly dissatisfied with the team they've put together, and they all seem to realize that they have probably formed the weakest out of the 8 teams. And this becomes even clearer as the third game is revealed to them. Tug of War. I find the set for this game to be one of the most impressive ones in the show, because they really did build those 2 gigantic towers and had the actors play tug of war atop of them. Though not against each other, but against the machine, but that was apparently enough to make it the most exhausting scene to film for most of the actors.
줄다리기.
그 줄다리기 할 때
줄다리기 씬을 찍을 때 진짜 힘들었어요. 왜냐면 실제로 힘을 줘서 줄을 잡아 당겨주시는 분이 사람이 아니라 그 기계였던 걸로 기억을 하거든요. 이게 아무리 당겨도 뭐 어떠한 그게 되지도 않고
정말 사력을 다해서 했거든요. 오버히트 정말 많이 했어요. 진짜. 죽아 막 이러면서.
그거하고 그냥 거의 탈진. 근데 뭐 재밌었어요.
Here's what the production designer said about the third game set. The main concept of this design is people who are abandoned on the road. The same design concept goes into the large dormitory in the form of an arch-shaped tunnel entrance. As for the set of this game, the concept is realized in the form of a road. The road-shaped game ring is set up on top of the 30-meter steel structure to imply the hopelessness the participants feel as they lost their ways and were thrown onto the road, and to maximize the dramatic impact of their being thrown down the asphalt floor. The physical set was made to the maximum height necessary for filming, and the scenes were completed with the work of the computer graphics team. Considering the team of our main characters consists of several women and an old man, hopes aren't exactly high, and the fears of the viewer are confirmed as we see Dak-soo's team, consisting only of men, easily winning their round as they pull the opposite team mercilessly to their death. The main characters are up next, and they are up against another old men team, meaning the chances to win aren't high. The characters voice similar opinions, but the old man isn't giving up yet. He tries to motivate his group, but the others are too dispirited. Gi-hun, however, in his ever-present optimism for other people, says they should hear the old man out. I just love the whole explanation scene, which fills up the next couple of minutes. It's the old man explaining that tug of war isn't purely about strength, but it's also a question of will and strategy. He tells them how to position themselves and which techniques to use. For some reason, this explanation is strangely mesmerizing to watch. I swear, when I watched this episode with a friend, we just sat there for full 5 minutes not saying anything because it was way too interesting to listen to the old man. Ali's at the back end, being the strong, dependable anchor of the group. At the very front, we have the leader, the person closest to the opposition who needs to be strong and isn't allowed to be dispirited. This position is filled by none other than Gi-hun, and I think it says a lot about his character that he's the stand-in for the person who needs to have the strongest will in this situation. The game starts, and the old man's plan seems to work without any problems. The second the opposite team shows a hint of weakness, Gi-hun says the word and they all start to pull. However, the opposite team isn't beaten yet, and they manage to make a comeback, pulling our main characters towards the abyss. In their moment of desperateness, Sang-woo comes up with a final idea. It's a crazy plan. Min-yeol screams for her life, demanding a different idea. But once again, Gi-hun is prepared to believe in people and says they should give Sang-woo's plan a try. Sang-woo counts down, the group stumbles forward towards the abyss, and the episode ends. This has got to be not only my favourite cliffhanger ever, quite literally, but this is also my favourite episode of the show up until this point. This episode shines a light on all of our main characters and helps us to understand each of their, core elements of their personalities. Deok-soo is an absolute piss-poor of a person who will only surround himself with people that boost his ego, but he will drop them as soon as they become useless. Min-yeol is a seemingly clever but also somewhat pathetic woman who simply tries to stick to the strongest or the best person, and she kind of tries to make a big deal out of it even though she didn't have anything to do with it in the first place. Sebyok is a lone wolf who has some serious trust issues but learns to soften up. Ali is as always the sweetest and most dependable of them all. The old man has some serious gaming knowledge and proves to be more valuable than one might have thought in the beginning. And of course there's Gi-hun, who absolutely shines in this episode, I think, by showing us how much he's willing to trust people and give their ideas a try. Even in the face of death, he's willing to give other people's idea a try because who knows, some good might come of it. We also get some more foreshadowing as to the future fate of some of these characters, like Deok-soo, Min-yeol, and the old man as well. This episode also properly introduces this little subplot that's going on with the doctor and the other guards and the organ harvesting business. And I think it goes to show that I think even the guards or the organizers of the game are maybe somewhat troubled as well if they feel forced to make money on the side by this organ harvesting business. And it emphasizes that even the guards are willing to compromise the philosophy and ideals of the place they work at, the equality and all that they talk about. But they're totally willing to put that aside if it means they can make some money on the side. Well, I personally think that the whole organ harvesting side storyline is not as interesting as the main plot line. I think it serves more as a device for Detective Hwang, especially in the next episode, to further infiltrate the guard ranks. I think the cheating of the doctor also shows us that no place is ever truly free of people who will tell you that fairness is guaranteed, because morals are corruptible, especially if it's about money. Those employees completely betray their bosses and the principals they work for by making money from literal dead people that they themselves have more or less directly killed. Even like the front man doesn't fully like follow through with his whole fairness principle that he talks about. If you take a look at like the Midnight Carnage murder game, like the whole reason for that thing is to weed out weak players. Like, how is that fair? It basically is just another incentive for the players there, because it shows them, oh, if you murder someone, money will go into the piggy bank much quicker, so how about you murder each other? You know, theoretically, from what was said in the first episode, there is the implication that there can be more than one winner. But I think like this Midnight Murder Carnage special game shows us that the game organizers never planned for multiple winners in the first place. Like, at this point, the game organizers are like purposefully out to kill other players in order to like raise the moral stake, and hoping that the contestants will continue to like fight with each other as the plays go on. And what I think Tug of War shows is that the violence is steadily increasing as the games go on, because now with Tug of War, the contestants have to actively play against each other. This is the first time that they actively have to kill each other in order to survive. And I think this is the point where the viewers realize that this story will definitely not end happily, and it will test our principles, and it will definitely challenge the characters' principles. Episode 5 immediately jumps back in and resolves the cliffhanger. Sang-woo's plan works. They manage to make the opposite team trip and have a massive comeback as they pull the other team over the edge. In the second before that happens, we get a brilliant slow-down close-up of Gi-hun, and the actor's expression here is perfect. Gi-hun realizes what is about to happen. They are going to pull these other people to their death. This is the first time during this series of games the contestants have to actively kill someone else in order to win and survive. This is a brilliant progression in regards to emotionally straining the characters more and more as the games go on. We've seen previously how Gi-hun reacts to murder, that he's strongly opposed to senseless homicide and violence, and wishes to avoid having to take a human's life because it's something special. I don't know if it's just me, but I think we can see Gi-hun hesitating in this shot. Everyone else behind him is pulling for their lives, but Gi-hun, who is closest to the opposite team, has to directly watch them falling to their deaths. He has a difficult time fully committing to what is about to happen. The opposite team is pulled over the edge, and they are killed by the impact as they fall off the platform. Our main characters take a moment to breathe before they are taken back to the lift. Here, Ji-young is having an argument with player 244, a rather religious man who prays to God for letting them live. Ji-young is strangely put off by that, a reaction we'll understand later on. Our team returns to the warehouse where Deok-soo, with a sense of worry if you ask me, observes Min-hyo walking in with the rest of her group. We learn that 40 contestants are left playing. During lunchtime our group gets some more bonding time, but it's a lot less fun than last time because Min-hyo continues to be an annoying twat about everything that's going on. I have a hard time describing her because I can partly understand why she behaves that way, but I also find her to be quite annoying. She just tries to stick to whoever she can in order to stay alive, and she doesn't care what she has to do or say in order to gain someone's favour. She's a bit of a false snake, and Ali finally is the one who calls her out on it.
거기서 그런 생각을 다 했어? 아까는 개소리라고 했잖아. 막 울면서 미쳤어, 개소리 하지 마 했잖아요.
Min-hyo has to go into racist insulting mode before immediately trying to find the leader of the group, but Sang-woo emphasizes that on their team, everyone is equal. The gang becomes worried about another attack breaking out during the night, so they come up with the plan to build a barricade and have 2 people keep watch at all times. As they get to building, Gi-hun actually has an interesting little back and forth with Deok-soo, who comes over to mock him, but Gi-hun makes a good point.
괜찮겠어? 내 팀이라는 저 쓰레기 같은 인간들을 정말 믿는 거야? 나 같으면 불 꺼지고 싸움이 나면 기회 봐서 너부터 죽일 거야. 네가 제일 센 놈이니까.
No one on Deok-su's team is a true teammate. They aren't people he can trust. Deok-su is the strongest person around, so naturally he will become the first target if the other tough guys on his team decide to rise above him. And surprisingly enough, this has an effect on Deok-su, who tells his teammates they should take a night off and just go to bed. We're starting to see more and more that Deok-su, deep down, isn't a strong man at all. He's weak, and his ego and beliefs are quickly knocked down because he is, whether he likes it or not, actually one of the most scared contestants. The barricade is built, and the gang gets to sleeping. The first two keeping watch are Sang-woo and Ali, who take the time for some relationship building and talking about their lives outside the game. Ali, remembering Sang-woo paying for his bus ticket, wants to pay him back and offers him some food he saved for him. Sang-woo feels uncomfortable with the constant high respect and attempted payback from Ali, so he offers him to simply call him by his first name.
알리는 33살입니다.
그럼 그냥 형이라고 해.
그래도 됩니까? 형.
Now, what Sang-woo actually does, in Korean that is, he tells Ali to call him Hyung. This is a Korean term used by younger brothers for older brothers, and honestly, this is such a sweet and endearing moment for these two. It puts them on an equal level and connects them in a meaningful way, which is going to be especially important and emotional once we get to episode 6. The next two to keep watch are Gi-yeon and the old man. But what happens is we suddenly see a riot breaking out. Workers are being beaten down as Gi-yeon sits there and watches on in horror as he sees an old friend of his being beaten to death right in front of him. Gi-yeon is eventually shaken out of his nightmare vision by the old man, who asks what's going on. Here we get a bit of background on Gi-yeon, who tells us that he once built a similar barricade at his old job when he was working for a car company. The workers went on strike after having been sacked because the company was struggling. The strike turned violent, and one of Gi-yeon's co-workers was killed in the process. This is actually a callback to something we've heard about in episode 2. Gi-yeon's wife accused him of being a bad father, saying he wasn't even there when she went into labor and almost lost the baby because she had to get to hospital by herself. Gi-yeon snapped at her, saying that his friend died that day and he had to help him and the other co-workers. I think this is another brilliant moment which shows who Gi-yeon is and where his priorities lie. We'll come back to that at the very end of the show, but for now it supports this idea we've had of our protagonist that Gi-yeon always helps whenever he can, even though his own circumstances aren't the best. This also contextualizes what we've seen of Gi-yeon in the outside world. There is a legitimate reason for his financial struggles. It's not just the gambling. He was pushed into those circumstances because the factory refused to give their workers any kind of job or financial security. The strike is also based on real-life events, which occurred during 2009 when Ssangyong Motors laid off almost 2,000 workers without warning after selling their company. However, this little story is cut short as the old man begins to show serious symptoms of his illness kicking in. He's got a fever and Gi-yeon tries to give him some water, which seems empty at first, but then, surprise, surprise, Se-byok comes in for the save. Here we get another glimpse at Se-byok's slow but steady character development, seeing as she doesn't look away from a fellow teammate suffering and chooses to help. Her and Gi-yeon have a little bonding moment, and this is where we leave our main characters for now. While all of this is happening, Detective Hwang is having his own incognito organ harvesting and breaking into officers' adventures. Following the aftermath of tug of war, Detective Hwang realizes that the guard whose place he has taken is involved in some illegal organ harvesting nonsense. He's taken to the improvised operating theatre, where we see, once again, player 111 cutting up a dead contestant and a couple of other guards observing the whole affair. During the conversation with his fellow guards, Detective Hwang almost gives himself away a few times, but luckily, the dog gets all annoyed and angry at the right moment. Together with another employee, Detective Hwang is given the organs to be delivered via going on a little diving trip. Leaving the detective for a moment, we see the doctor is getting even angrier as he learns that the guards can't tell him yet what the next game is going to be. He goes into full slasher mode and takes one of the guards hostage as he demands to be told what game he'll have to play next. A fight breaks out between him and the guards and they all make a run forward. Eventually, the dog and one of the guards end up in the giant playground from the second game. The guard tries to regain the dog's favor by taking off his mask, showing him that he's an actual good person who he can trust. But of course, that's all rubbish. The guard tries to kill the dog but is apprehended by the front man. He's angry because the guard have disregarded the game's most important philosophy, namely equality. The guard has broken their most valuable principle, and for that the front man shoots him and also kills the doctor. And this is where a friend of mine was once again calling out the equality fairness argument the front man is trying to make, because not all of the games ever have a 100% equal winning chance for everyone. One thing is that many of the games are based on pure luck, choosing the shape for the honeycomb game, who did you decide to team up with, how many players decide to play the marble game by guessing, not knowing that the numbers during stepping stones is the order in which they start. The organizers deliberately withhold information regarding the game, so none of the players ever has a fair chance from the beginning. Also, during the games, there will always be something like biological or intellectual advantage. Sang-woo makes that very argument by pointing out that, purely statistically speaking, men are better at most games than women. What about handicapped people? For example, Ali's one hand misses some fingers. Doesn't he have a disadvantage in a way? What about players who used to work out regularly versus players who are maybe not inclined to any kind of physical training? The old man has an age disadvantage, being slower and more fragile than most players. Just wondering how the contestants are actually chosen, and if it's really only based on the financial background, because you would have to make sure you have a group of people who are all more or less on the same level, right? I know the games don't necessarily lend themselves to exploiting like a huge advantage an individual players might have, but there's also still a difference between a kid playing a children's game and an adult playing a children's game. There are so many moments and details which demonstrate that the whole concept of the Squid Game is anything but the fair competition the organizers claim it to be. Like, I get the frontman's base principle when he talks about the game's equality, but I think we can all agree that that is a fallible philosophy. Coming back to Detective Huang, together with another guard, he makes his way through a number of tunnels, eventually reaching like an underground pool area where the diving equipment is located. It is here that the other guard finally calls out Detective Huang after having realized that he must be some kind of pretender. However, Detective Huang, who has the advantage of being the good guy with a gun, turns the tables and gets the guard talking. After a suspenseful back and forth, the guard tells him about the frontman's office where all kinds of records and files are stored about the games and the contestants. He tries to convince the detective into letting him help, but Huang ain't having it, and he kills the guard. The corpse is later found by the frontman, who is now on to the detective. Speaking of which, he has finally made his way to the frontman's office, where he discovers a room filled with folders upon folders containing information on previous games. Turns out, these deadly games have been organized for several decades, starting in the late 80s. Eventually, Detective Huang finds a list of previous winners, where we get a cool little reference to the show's previous title, Round 6. It is here, at the very end of the episode, that we learn that Detective Huang's brother, Huang In-ho, participated in the 28th Squid Game and went on to become the winner. So coming off of what might have been my favorite episode in this series, this is perhaps my least favorite, though we might have to reevaluate that after we watch episode 7. The thing is, this is purely based on the fact that I just don't think that the whole incognito storyline with Detective Huang is as interesting as the main storyline with the contestants. It's just as simple as that. Like, I'm not saying that the detective storyline is bad, because I think we do need a storyline that helps us to see what's going on behind the scenes with the guards and how the organization of the games work. It's just that, you know, the main storyline with life and death games with our main characters, it's the main event. Of course, that's more interesting. I will say that the whole investigation that Detective Huang is doing takes on a very interesting turn once we find out that his brother was not only a former contestant of the games, but actually managed to win them. So that must mean, theoretically, that his brother is still alive. So at this point we're wondering, like, how did he go missing then? Like, what happened to him? If he won the games, he must be rich, so he must, of course, still be alive, you would assume. I mean, we'll find out who the brother is later on, naturally. And I think you can already tell who it going to be, but I think the mystery works quite well here, since this is like the first major development that we've seen in Detective Huang's investigation. And even if we can already take a guess who like the front man or who the brother is going to be, there is still a layer of interest, I think, here for Detective Huang's story, because not only is he trying to find out where his brother is or what happened to him, he also still is trying to like expose the existence of the Squid Game. Like, he's collecting all of this data, which he can hopefully then later show to like the chief of police or whatever. But now there's even like an extra layer of pressure, because the front man and the guard, they are onto him now. It's no longer the fear of like being found out because he's no longer incognito. It's the fear of like literally being hunted and getting killed because they are onto him. Like, we already saw that the police weren't prepared to do anything when Gi-Yoon told them about the death game, meaning that Detective Huang is our only chance for the outside world finding out about the deadly games. So of course we will want Detective Huang to succeed and not be found out. As to what happens with the contestants in this episode, I think the solution to the cliffhanger is absolutely brilliant, with even like a little bit of tension as Gi-Yoon like almost falls off the edge. And I love this little moment of hesitation that we can see from him, because he's like standing in the front facing all of these people who he is about to kill. So I love that we get this little like close-up of his face there. And I think you can really feel, not only in that moment but also later when they're all on the lift, you can really feel like the way, like everything like kind of weighing on the players of what they've just done. Like, they're in the lift and everyone is silent, they can't even really look at each other. It's just like that one guy praying, and they all leave the lift together, having been mere strangers just a few hours ago, but now they have come to like bond over this mutual trauma, basically, of having killed 10 other people together. The emotional stakes are like really starting to kick in this episode, and they're only going to reach like their high point in the next episode, which is why I think it's great that in this episode, like before the big emotional episode number 6, in this episode we get like these little bonding moments between our main characters during like the Night's Watch. Especially, I think the moments between naturally Sang-woo and Ali are important here, giving you like this really emotional feeling of when they have their conversation and you see how close they are at this point. And naturally also the conversation between Gi-Yoon and the old man, where we also get to hear about Gi-Yoon's past. Like, all of these conversations show us how, not only how much these people have like grown by themselves as people, but also how they have learned to kind of bond with each other, and that they have become friends, which is going to make it all the more worse, especially during the next episode when all of these bonds are just broken. Like I already mentioned, I think it's great that we get some background on what happened to Gi-Yoon like pre-episode 1, because it helps us to understand why he's actually financially struggling. Yes, we saw that he has a gambling addiction, but that is not the sole reason as to why he's financially struggling. Like, there is this real life reason that happens to a lot of people, and I think it puts a lot of things into perspective as to not only why Gi-Yoon is financially struggling, but also just helps us to understand why he is the way he is. And we'll come back to this by the end of like the final episode, but this flashback and background knowledge that we get about Gi-Yoon's character, I think, helps us to once again understand like who he is deep down. Like, he's just a man who wants to help other people. He wants to help them, even if it means that he himself experiences misfortune, because he's just that kind of guy. Also the fact that he shares this moment with the old man is especially important, I think, because I think it sort of serves as foreshadowing as to not only what we get in episode 6 later when the two play the marble game, but also as to what happens in the final episode. So this episode basically serves as like the emotional preparation for the next episode, because it shows you how far these characters have come and how deeply they've grown to like care about each other, and how they have connected over like this life and death experience with like this feeling of death and claustrophobia and trauma just surrounding them. Okay, but at this point I'm just stalling because I want to avoid the emotional impact of episode 6. So I guess it's time to talk about the episode that broke so many people, including me. While Detective Huang continues to hide out in the frontman's office, the players are getting ready for another game. The old man, following his battle against his illness during the night, has become even worse, as we saw that he wet himself and is clearly embarrassed about it. However, Guillaume steps in, giving the old man his jacket to cover up his trousers because he's nice that way. The players get their breakfast and then proceed, once more, to the staircase. Here they encounter a rather gruesome sight, as the corpses of player 111 and his organ-harvesting guard colleagues have been displayed for everyone to see. Once again, the equality is emphasized by the frontman by saying that the dead they see have broken the system's rules for their own benefit. The players are once again brought to the wide void, where they are told that the following game will be played in pairs. Sang-woo immediately chooses Ali, and Ji-young invites Seo to play with her, saying,
그럼 나랑 해. 내가 무조건 이기게 해줄 테니까. 무슨 수로? 무슨 수를 써서 돼.
The old man and Gi-yoon are left over, and the old man even supports Gi-yoon in trying to find a good partner. But naturally, we all know how this goes. I actually like this short reversion here of Gi-yoon's hand here, as he hesitates to partner up with another player, and then proceeds to extend his hand towards the old man, choosing to play with him instead. Since there's an odd number of players, one contestant is left over, and who else should it be but Minyo? She screams her head off and is eventually dragged away by the guards. Then the players enter the set for the 4th game. According to Chie Kyung-sun, this set took the longest to build and is meant to denote a feeling of nostalgia. This game is built on the theme of ganbu. Ganbu means close and trusted friend, and you can make ganbu friends with each other by making a finger promise. The set for the 4th game is designed to tell the story of the memories of one of the participants. The small pieces of memories are brought in as different sides of the alleys, each of which are like the stage for a play. The key to this design is to create the feel of depth by layering flat surfaces. The objects, such as the common roof design or the gate design of the old multifamily houses, were used as the flat surface elements. It is then announced the 4th game is going to be marbles. The players explore the set as they talk about how to defeat their opponents. Gi-yoon and the old man talk about the past and decide to become ganbu, a friend who you share games and fun with. It's a very sweet moment between the two characters, which is, however, immediately undercut by a horrifying announcement.
이번 게임은 각자 자신의 구슬을 가지고 지금 여러분의 옆에 있는 짝과 시합을 벌여 상대의 구슬 10개를 모두 따내는 사람이 승리합니다.
I'll repeat that because some people have been arguing about this. Using your own 10 marbles. You must win your partner's 10 marbles. So don't give me that whole, why didn't they just exchange their marble bags because it didn't specify you need 20 to win argument. We spent the past 5 episodes watching these people play games that always end in death for the opponents. Do you really think the organizers now throw in a game where it's possible for everyone to survive? Since you have to use your own marbles, it is clearly implied that you need to play with your partner to win their marbles. Ergo, you need 20 to win. There's no reason to argue this. We all know how these kids' games work by now. So let's go through each pair individually and see what happens to them. Starting off short and easy, Deok-soo teams up with one of his goons, and it is here that he finally comes to realize that his strength and position mean absolutely nothing because his former teammate just mocks him. After almost losing, Deok-soo manages to change the game, quite literally, and is able to make a comeback. Eventually, with a bit of luck, he emerges as the winner and proceeds to the next round. Okay, and now things get emotional, regardless of who we start with. So let's do this. The ever-sweet Ali is terrified by having to play against Sang-woo, but the older man reassures him and they decide to play. Ali actually turns out to have quite a bit of luck, so much so that soon Sang-woo only has one marble left. It is here that the emotional stress completely takes him over. He becomes aggressive, shouting at Ali and accusing him of cheating. Here we see how psychologically exhausting these kids' games have become. You're faced with your own death by a person you might know quite well at this point, and of course you do everything to avoid that. The marble game especially is designed to make the players question and test the bonds with their fellow players. After Tug of War being the first game in which you actively had to kill other players but shared that trauma with your teammates, you are now on your own against one of your former teammates. I bet the organizers of the Squid Game structured the games like this on purpose because they knew that the people who grouped up for Tug of War would also team up for another game if given the opportunity. Sang-woo thought he was playing it cleverly again, teaming up with the physically strong Ali who would complement Sang-woo's high intelligence. But turns out this is a game you can't win by applying strategy like that. Sang-woo finds the idea of losing preposterous. In a way, I think he even believes something along the lines of "I can't lose to someone like Ali," where Sang-woo's elitism kicks in again. But this is where Sang-woo's strategic gameplay reaches a new level. He knows Ali. He spent enough time with him in order to understand that the young man is emotionally vulnerable and easily influenced. So Sang-woo decides to manipulate Ali by telling him that he believes there is a way they both can win by explaining not all teams will finish in time, and then the organizers will have to decide differently who wins and who loses. I don't think Ali even fully understands what's being explained to him here. He's way too caught up by his emotional turmoil. He doesn't want to kill this man who he has grown so close to over the past couple of days. So what Ali does, he believes his friend. He listens to Sang-woo as he's done before, and he accepts his plan because he wants neither of them to die. But dear sweet Ali is too naive and innocent for his own good. Having used a gunshot as a distraction, Sang-woo actually switched the marble bags and took Ali's marbles while merely giving his friend a bag full of stones. And it is here, shortly before the time runs out, when Ali is looking for Sang-woo and sees him handing in the marbles, that he realizes he's been betrayed. It is heartbreaking because Ali is calling out to his friend. He simply can't believe that Sang-woo would do this to him after all they've been through.
형 어디 있어? 형! 상우 형! 나 보고 왔어요! 형! 상우 형!
Sang-woo doesn't even look as it happens, too ashamed of actually looking at the friend he has betrayed in order to save himself. Not only did he cheat, he did so after Ali nearly won the game himself, but Sang-woo could not accept a simple defeat like that in a fair children's game. While this isn't the stage yet where Sang-woo directly murders to get ahead, it's pretty much the step right in front of that. He can, quote-unquote, excuse his behavior by saying that this is how the game worked. No one will have to know of his betrayal, and Gi-eun or one of his other former teammates can't hold the death of Ali against him. But Sang-woo knows what he did. This is how he has decided to play the games. From here on out, he will only become more determined to do whatever it takes in order to win. Moving on to our next team, Seo and Ji-young. The two women are hit just as heavily as everyone else as they hear that they'll have to compete against each other. Seo immediately shifts back to her lone wolf, avoid deep emotions at all cost attitude, and wants to end the whole game as quickly as possible. But Ji-young won't let her, and instead proposes the two of them should take the time to talk before they'll eventually decide the winner in one single round. This conversation will show us that Seo has slowly learned to open up, as she has now spent enough time with Ji-young and the others in order to be ready to share more private information. Seo goes on to tell Ji-young about her family in North Korea, how her parents are trying to leave the country while her little brother is staying at a children's home. Her deepest wish is for her mum to come join them in South Korea, and visit Jeju Island, a beautiful holiday spot south of the Korean peninsula. And this might be just as good a time as any to put in some side info in regards to North Korean defectors and refugees, because Sebyok's story is arguably one of the most fascinating, if not even the most interesting one in the entire show, and I took that as an opportunity to do some old-fashioned Wikipedia deep dives and learn some new stuff. So, just for you, dear viewers, here's an abridged version of some highly complex but important information on Sebyok's North Korean background. There is South Korea's Ministry of Unification, which is a government organization that is in charge of preparing for future reunification between North and South Korea. It is responsible for North-South relations, including economic trade, diplomacy, and communication. The Ministry of Unification is basically the main organization which manages North Korean defectors in South Korea by establishing admission processes and resettlement policies. Since 1953, 100,000 to 300,000 North Koreans have defected, most of whom have fled to Russia or China. In 2017, there were 31,093 defectors registered with the Unification Ministry in South Korea. Most of them were women. However, because of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, the numbers of defectors have been trending towards less than 1,000 per year since 2018. Most North Korean refugees leave the country reportedly because of economic reasons. Based on a study, women make up the majority of defections because they are more likely to suffer financial hardships. According to the Ministry of Unification, over 33,000 North Korean refugees have resettled in South Korea in the year 2019. North Korean refugees arriving in the South first face joint interrogation to ensure that they are not spies. They are then sent to Hana-won, a government resettlement center, where they are provided a 12-week social adaptation mandatory course mainly focused on economic and political education and job training. After 3 months of resettlement training, the government provides assistance in residence, employment, and health insurance. However, psychological needs such as mitigating traumatic experiences and vulnerable mental health statuses are often not appropriately addressed. North Korean defectors experience serious difficulties connected to psychological and cultural adjustment once they have been resettled. This is mostly due to the conditions that North Koreans live in while in their own country, as well as the difficulty to adjust to the new ways of living in South Korea. North Korean refugees who resettle in South Korea have been exposed to various forms of traumatic experiences in their home countries before migration, which makes readjustment in a new country a psychologically difficult task. North Koreans can often face societal and cultural discrimination because of their geographical origins. Once resettled, many experience feelings of homesickness, cultural shock, alienation, perceived discrimination, and marginalization. As a consequence, a number of North Korean refugees identified as suffering from depression, anxiety, or suicidal ideation. So there you go. Knowing some of the background stuff really puts into perspective how hard Sebyok must have been fighting for her family to get to South Korea. I can't imagine the physical and psychological hardships she must have gone through. It is more than understandable why it isn't easy for her to open up to other people about her past. This is something highly personal and loaded with multiple emotional layers. What I told you here only scratches the surface of what real-life North Korean refugees have to go through, so I'm hoping that, just like me, you found some new interest in an important topic when you heard Sebyok telling us about her family. Ji-young is fully wrapped up in Sebyok's story as well, even imagining of joining her on her travels one day once they get out of the Squid Game. But then the realization kicks in. They won't be able to see each other again after this game. This happened several times throughout their conversation, and I think it shows what a wonderful connection these two women have come to build over a very short period of time. For just a few minutes, these two are able to forget about the deadly games and the money. It's just about them and their lives. Sebyok is opening up and might even consider letting Ji-young join her if there ever was the possibility of the two of them leaving together. The conversation then moves on to a darker topic as Ji-young asks about Sebyok's experience with death. We learn that a plague killed half of Sebyok's family, which would explain all the more why she is so close to the remaining family she has left and would want to protect them as best she can. Then we finally get to hear Ji-young's story. Her mother was killed by her abusive, super-religious father, who then went on to abuse Ji-young before she finally fought back and killed him. Considering who her father was, we now understand why Ji-young was so aggressive towards the religious player on her team who prayed to God after the tug-of-war game. For Ji-young, religion and God have lost any kind of positive connotation, because those things only remind her of her father, who did the most horrible of things to her. Ji-young grew up without a mother, was abused by the man who should have taken care of her, then ended up in prison for killing said man, and after being released from prison, she was recruited by the organizers of the Squid Game. In a way, Ji-young is one of the loneliest characters we meet in the show. She says that she had nowhere else to go after prison, so she might as well sign up for a deadly game in case she gets some money out of it. In a way, Ji-young has got nothing to lose and nothing to win. Her life is empty. And I think this becomes all the more evident and sadder once you contrast her behavior with her backstory. Out of all the contestants we've met so far, Ji-young is definitely the most easygoing and relaxed one. She was barely faced by the news that she would have to compete against Sebyok, and we never see her lose control over her emotions. Part of me thinks that Ji-young's behavior is a mask she puts on. Similar to Sebyok, she acts like the stuff that she's experiencing doesn't bother her all that much, but I believe that deep down Ji-young is one of the saddest characters in the show. But you could also take her demeanor at face value and see it as an act of acceptance. Ji-young has long accepted her fate, has resigned to the fact that she has nowhere to go and that there's nothing for her to do. Even if she did win that money, it wouldn't fix her life, it wouldn't make her happy. Whether or not that sense of acceptance has been there since the beginning, it certainly becomes the core element of Ji-young's character as the women eventually decide to play the marble game. Sebyok puts in some effort, but when it's Ji-young's turn, she basically forfeits the game by simply dropping her marble. Naturally, Sebyok immediately catches on and demands they play again with Ji-young doing it properly, but the young woman is satisfied with the outcome.
난 없어. 뭐? 너는 여기서 나갈 이유가 있지만 난 없어. 이유가 있는 사람이 나가는 게 맞잖아. 그게 맞잖아. 너는 꼭 살아서 나가. 그래서 엄마도 만나고 동생도 찾고 제주도에도 꼭 가.
As would support this idea of acceptance I've mentioned earlier, we might as well assume that Ji-young had planned all of this from the very beginning. She knew, or at least didn't care, that she might not win the game. Perhaps she even planned on dying deliberately so her death could at least benefit someone she cared about. And I like to think that, even though she's evidently sad, Ji-young dies happily. She smiles as she utters her final words to Sebyok.
고마워. 나랑 같이 해줘서.
She dies knowing that there was at least someone in her life who was nice to her, who was willing to listen and understand, and now she can help that someone achieve the life she never had. It's tragic, and we see how much it affects the ever so stoic Sebyok, who sheds tears as she walks away, having won the marble game. And finally, we move on to the last pair, Gi-yoon and the old man. The fact that the two men have to play against each other visibly hurts Gi-yoon. However, the old man doesn't even realize what's going on, as his dementia is becoming worse and he's completely losing himself in illusions of the past. The set the players find themselves in remind the old man of the neighborhood he used to live in, and now he's desperate to find his old home. The old man's completely gone at this point, and Gi-yoon doesn't quite know how to handle it. Here we see the emotional and psychological toll these games are taking on our main character. Gi-yoon feels bad for both himself and the old man. He doesn't want to hurt his gumbu, but at the same time he doesn't want to die either, so the two must get on with playing before the time runs out. The levels of frustration and psychological pain become evident when Gi-yoon eventually snaps and tries to literally shake some sense into the old man as he screams at him that they need to play now. The old man is somewhat frightened by Gi-yoon's attitude, even though it is obvious that the younger man has a hard time acting in such a way towards a man he has a lot of respect for. Eventually, the two men get to playing, with Gi-yoon acting under immense pressure while the old man seems to simply enjoy himself. The game doesn't go well for Gi-yoon, and soon enough, he's only got one marble left. It's the old man's turn, and there's no possibility of him guessing wrong. But then his dementia takes a hold of him once more, and he can't remember the bet he's made, so he asks Gi-yoon.
뭐라고 했지? 네. 방금 뭐라고 했냐고?
Now, this was me watching this moment for the very first time. Lie, just lie your ass off, Gi-yoon, just do it. And that's indeed what Gi-yoon proceeds to do. It takes him a visible amount of effort to lie to the old man. He hates doing this. He knows it is morally wrong and unfair, but he does it anyway because the will to live is stronger. We even see Gi-hun actively pushing the old man towards misremembering as he makes the old man second-guess himself. Thus, Gi-hun is able to win back his marbles.
근데 방금 뭐라고 하셨죠?
네? 내가 뭐라고 했더라?
자기라고 하셨잖아요.
내가 그랬어?
예.
Up until this point, Gi-hun has been, more or less, our morally pure and innocent protagonist, the one we sympathize with because he continuously tries to do the right thing even under such horrendous conditions. But that is no longer the case. Gi-hun has fully stepped into the morally grey area of the Squid Game. Here I would like to draw a comparison to what we saw transpire between Sang-woo and Ali because it is, in many ways, a similar situation. One player betrays the other by exploiting an emotional weakness. I've seen many people giving Sang-woo a lot of shit for what he did, and don't get me wrong, he did a bad thing by stabbing Ali in the back. But in what way is that any worse than what Gi-hun did to the old man? Both men have betrayed someone they like, someone they've befriended and learned to care for, and now they are condemning them to die because they cheated. In a way, you could argue that Gi-hun's act of betrayal is even worse than Sang-woo's, because Gi-hun is exploiting another person's illness, knowing fully well that the old man can't do anything about it. Perhaps it is because Sang-woo has already taken on antagonistic features at this point in the story. Perhaps it's because he ends up killing Ali, a fan-favourite character. Perhaps it's because we are more willing to forgive Gi-hun because he clearly feels bad about his act of cheating. There are many reasons, and don't get me wrong, I understand all of them, but I think it's important to point out that Gi-hun is, at this point in the story, no longer the morally white person we like to empathize with. Soon enough, it is the old man who's left with only one marble, but then his unstable mind takes over once again, and he walks through the streets of the neighborhood once more. Eventually, he finds what he's been looking for this entire time, his old home where he used to live with his family. He's lost in nostalgic memories, which once again frustrates Gi-hun because not only is he so close to winning, the death of the old man is being drawn out so that Gi-hun has to endure the emotional torture even longer. Just before Gi-hun is unable to properly deal with the situation and he desperately tries to knock some sense into the old man. But this is where we get the final gut punch.
말이 안 되는 거잖아. 그럼 자네가 날 속이고 내 굿을 가져간 건 말이 되고?
At first it seems like the old man wanted to point out the unfairness of Gi-hun's actions, but he quickly comes around and shows understanding for Gi-hun's situation. Without any further playing, the old man gives his last marble to Gi-hun, reminding him of their promise from earlier, saying the Gambu share with one another.
우리는 깐부잖아. 기억 안 나? 우리 손가락 걸고 깐부 맺은 거. 깐부끼리는 네 거 내 거가 없는 거야.
And to fully reach the emotional breaking point, the old man thanks Gi-hun for playing with him.
그동안 고마웠네. 자네 덕분에 잘 있다가 가네.
Just as the audience, Gi-hun is emotionally broken by this last conversation. He's overwhelmed by guilt for having tricked the old man. That guilt has turned into deep shame as he's been told that the old man knew what he was doing. And now, despite all of that, the old man still gives him his marble because he wants to honor the promise they had made, which must make Gi-hun feel like he doesn't even deserve to win. And there's one more final emotional gut punch, as the old man, seconds before he's killed, remembers his name.
나 이름이 생각났어. 내 이름은 일남이야. 오 일남.
The camera moves away from the old man, and we follow Giyun, who hears the gunshot ring through the neighborhood set, and we end the episode along with our main character in tears and emotionally broken. Apart from perhaps the last episode, this one really takes the biscuit when it comes to like getting you to an emotional breaking point. Like, this is the kind of episode that was basically inevitable, because all of us knew going into this that most of these characters weren't going to survive. They would end up dying playing these games. I mean, we already saw how Tug of War raised up like the bar when it came to like psychologically torturing these characters, and now we have reached the point where the contestants have to like actively turn against each other. Like, we already saw that in Tug of War, but that sort of had you sharing the trauma with your teammates. But now in the marble game, we have characters we like, who we know have bonded, actively having to turn against each other, meaning they have to kill each other if they want to survive. And I think this is cleverly planned by the gaming organizers, who are trying to go for like an even more emotionally disturbing level of harm with each game. Because at this point, the marble game, it's not really about the money anymore. It's about turning these contestants against each other. It's about breaking the players. If we look at Sebyok and Jeong, I think we see like two women who have perhaps the most, like the purest and the most innocent kind of essence through their characters. And there is this kind of special bond shared by these two women who have been denied so many things through their lives, and they're now kind of becoming like kindred spirits to one another. I mean, creator Huang himself has said that these two characters are the most innocent ones, and I think he's right.
오히려 정말 그들이 어떻게 보면 세상에 제일 때가 덜 탄 그런 사람들이라고 생각을 했어요. 삶의 끝에 몰린 사람들은 누구나 악의 다툼을 벌이고 서로를 죽여서라도 이기고 올라가려고 하는 생각이 들지만, 만약에 그렇지 않은 사람이 있다면 이들이었으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 제가 했고요. 전혀 모르는 사람에도 불구하고 이들이 알 수 없는 어떤 뭐 우정, 그 짧은 사이에 생긴 그런 연대, 서로에 대한 공감과 이해, 이런 것들이 어느 한 팀에서 나타난다면 이들일 것 같은 생각이 들어서 몇 년 전에 썼을 때는 지영이 남자였어요. 지용이었거든요. 그래서 여자들끼리 어떤 이런 연대감 같은 게 더 설득력이 있을 것 같은 생각이 가장 많이 우는 장면이 아닐까 싶어요.
And I think it was also a good decision to turn Jiyoung's character from a man into a woman, because that way you feel like there is more of a special bond between these two women, because it just feels different on an emotional level if you have like two young women sharing their life stories with one another, and it's hard to put into words, honestly, but I think it just makes more sense to me to have two women going through that instead of having Sebyok have the same conversation with a man. Now, looking at Sang-woo, I think he has reached like a new stage in his antagonistic development, and I think we can now fully understand who this man is going to be and what he's going to do further down the line. Like, he wants to win. He sees himself as the smart one, and there is nothing that will keep him from winning. He will do whatever it takes in order to get that prize money, even if it means brutally cheating on a man who you've befriended just like 2 days ago. Like, I think at this point in the story, you can perhaps already tell that Sang-woo and Gi-yoon are going to be the final contestants, because they both win this marble game by doing very similar things. They both cheat. They both screw over people they like. But the important thing is that the emotional level behind this, like the moralities behind this, are different. Like, Gi-yoon feels true remorse over what he's doing, over what he's done, whereas Sang-woo, he simply does it because he felt like this is how you survive. This is how you survive and win. That's just how it works. This is what you do in life. And he doesn't feel bad about it. And I think this emotional conflict is already hinted at here, and it's this clash of moralities that is going to become greater as like the last couple of episodes go on. So let's see how these contestants are even pushed further to their breaking point. We open the episode with the frontman observing the aftermath of the marble game. It is here that we learn two important things. Detective Wang has not been found yet, and the VIPs are said to arrive soon. As we will see later, the VIPs turn out to be quite important characters that will put the entire Squid Game into a new context. We see the surviving players returning to the warehouse and, surprise, surprise, Minyo is alive and well and was escorted back to the warehouse by the guards. Deok-soo is visibly upset about her still being alive, and, if you ask me, he is afraid of her. He managed to survive a game against one of his former companions who turned his back on him, and now he sees that the one person he's betrayed multiple times, and who has told him she would kill him, is still alive. Minyo is a threat who could strike at any moment, and I think Deok-soo has realized by now that being surrounded by muscle and shouting about being the strongest will not help him win the game. In total, 17 contestants are now left playing. During mealtime, Sang-woo tells a grieving Gi-eun not to make a big deal out of the old man dying. He is trying to rationalize what happened, saying it was inevitable and that other players had it much worse. I'm not sure if Sang-woo is trying to help here, but he's definitely doing a shit job at making Gi-eun feel better. Perhaps Sang-woo is trying to talk himself down more than anyone else, saying to himself that Ali's fate was inevitable and that him dying wasn't in any way better or worse than any other of the players' deaths. Player 69, a man who lost his wife in the marble game, begs the other players to vote for the games to stop, but no one joins him. He suffers a complete mental breakdown, being unable to understand how anyone would go on playing the games just because of the prize money.
당신들이 사람이야. 정말 이 미친 짓을 계속하겠다는 거야? 저 돈 때문에! 당신들이 이 안에서 제일 티냈던 사람들을 죽였잖아. 저 돈 때문에.
But Sang-woo will not let himself be blamed for what happened. He explains that even if they give up, none of the dead people will come back to life, and the money they will win is at the cost of everyone who died during the games. I honestly think that Sang-woo is more upset about what transpired during the marble game than he likes to admit, especially since he brings up part of an argument that will later be used against him. All these people died, so they could get this far. But we all know that Sang-woo doesn't really believe that. Sang-woo is in so deep at this point, he won't let the games or his actions be stopped by anyone. Having come this far, there's no going back, and they might as well do everything it takes in order to win that prize money. Meanwhile, the frontman is on the hunt for Detective Wang. Being unable to find him in his office, he proceeds to inspect the corpse the guards have found washed ashore. It's the body of the guard Huang had killed in order to steal his uniform. They find the detective's ID on the corpse, and the frontman stares at Huang's picture for a long time before he orders the body to be incinerated. Knowing who the frontman will turn out to be, this is a clever little moment of foreshadowing which shows that there's some kind of deeper connection between the frontman and the detective. He's then informed that the VIPs have finally arrived. We catch a glimpse of the host of the Squid Game, who decides that he won't be attending the meeting. Then we finally meet the VIPs. It's a group consisting of 6 men, all wearing golden animal masks to conceal their identities. They are greeted by the frontman, who pays his respect to the VIPs and proceeds to lead them to a room which I can only describe as having an interior design with a jungle theme gone totally rogue. But naturally, the production designer Chie Kyung-sun put some specific thought into that set. The VIP room is where I had to think through until the very end, and the design of the space was finished last. I looked through a large array of images to form a concept. The images I found were all very great, so it took a long time for me to conceptualize what the VIP room should look like. In the end, I decided to create the world of animals. The VIPs are the kind of people who take other people's lives for entertainment and treat them like game pieces on a chessboard, so I wanted to create a powerful and instinctive look for the room. Every animal mask these VIPs are wearing, and every prop in their sitting area comes with hidden meanings. The The forest-like space was worked on by the best scenic artist, and the large forest was created with the greens team through rounds of drafting and testing. As such, quite a lot of budget went into this room. I also had multiple meetings with the body painting artists to bring the art team's design to life. The fact that the VIP room is literally constructed out of human beings is especially noteworthy, I think. It shows the total objectification of the people, so much so that they are literally being used as furniture. To the VIPs, ordinary people are nothing but objects. They are things they can use however they please, and no one will object because no one would dare to. The VIPs are wealthy, egotistical capitalism personified. And this might as well be as good a time as any to talk about the one major flaw of the series. Yes, the actors who play the VIPs are by no means as good as the Korean actors. Personally, I don't think they are as abysmal as many people on the internet make them out to be, but it's still a noticeable drop in quality. I've read somewhere online that non-Korean roles in K-dramas are often not as skilled as the Korean cast, so it might simply be a case of bad casting. However, it also has to be noted here that the script for the English-speaking parts has an entirely different tone. It's simpler and slightly more stilted. In a way, the actors are doing their best with what they've been given. In all honesty, I don't think the performances here are as immersion-breaking as many people have said they are. And in a way, it fits the characterization of who the VIPs are supposed to be. They are filthy rich capitalist wankers who objectify anyone who's not on their level, and they take pleasure in making people play deadly games for nothing else but their entertainment. The VIPs are nonsensical. They say and do absurd things and will laugh about their own crude jokes because no one would dare to call them out on that bullshit. I can fully believe that a bunch of rich twats would act like that if you put them all in a room together. I think it is also quite telling that the VIPs consist only of men, most of them being white and with one IP I think implied to be from China, because those are the kinds of people who run the world. There's no doubt about it. The capitalist world market is dominated by China and rich Western countries. Even in a country like South Korea, those people still pose as the highest authority. It is even implied in a line of dialogue that South Korea isn't the only country to organize a Squid Game.
I am dying to know what this next game is. Give us a hint, will you?
As much as I'd like to, sir, I'd hate to ruin the fun for everyone.
The games this edition have been amazing.
Right, the contest in Korea was the best. Thank you.
Presumably, all of the VIPs have hosted or will host a competition like this one. This is not a one-off event which occurs only in South Korea. It is played around the entire planet because men like the VIPs have the money, the power, and the authority to do whatever they like, and the capitalist system from which they profit will continuously allow them to organize these games. The VIPs are then led to their individual rooms, and it is here that we come back to Detective Wang, who is able to dress himself up as one of the servants and proceeds to secretly record everything that is about to transpire. Returning back to the contestants, it's a new morning and the day begins with a grim discovery. Player 69, the man who lost his wife, committed suicide during the night. The 16 remaining players can do nothing but stare at the corpse and the money in the piggy bank, which is filled once more with another 100 million won. I don't know if that was on purpose, but I like the detail here that everyone immediately stares back up at the piggy bank, whereas Gi-Eun's stare is focused on the dead man, as he is one of the few people to still truly care about death at this point, while everyone else is simply enamored with the promise of the prize money. Soon afterwards, the contestants are once again led through the big staircase in order to play the fifth game. They enter the White Void once more, where they are presented with several vests which are numbered 1 through 16. The numbers in the middle are taken first because they are, as the VIPs observe correctly, the safest choice because the players don't know yet what the numbers refer to. Soon enough, all the numbers are gone, except for 1 and 16. And Gi-Eun finally decides to make a choice and approaches number 1. But the other remaining contestant asks him to give him number 1, since he wants to be in charge once in his life and make his own choice.
제가 평생 뒤에 숨어서 남 눈치만 보고 살았어요. 평생 한 번도 제 인생을 주인공처럼 살아본 적이 없어요. 안 그래야지 하다가도 항상 겁이 나서 오늘도 결국 남들 눈치만 보다가 또 끝에 남았어요. 태어나서 딱 한 번만이라도 제대로 살아보고 싶습니다. 제일 앞에서 당당하게 부탁
And here, Giyun's primary characterization kicks in. He's forthcoming and nice as always, so of course he says yes. Instead of insisting on his own choice, he rather accommodates the other man because he doesn't want to be mean. Even though it inconveniences himself once again, Giyun decides to be polite and relents. So he ends up with the number 16, the final one. Then the players proceed on to the next area where the 5th game is revealed. Glass stepping stones. The contestants find themselves in an absolutely enormous circus tent, high above the ground, and in front of them is a large bridge made up of several glass tiles. The rules are, get to the other side within the time limit. The tiles made out of tempered glass can hold up the weight of 2 players, while the normal glass will break instantly. The numbers the players are wearing is the order in which they have to cross the bridge, meaning that Giyun is lucky because he has to go last. And to make things even more uncomfortable, the VIPs are watching it all from their fancy jungle room with human sofas. Like Giyun betting on horses in the first episode, the VIPs are now betting on the contestants and are waiting to be entertained by their deaths and suffering. And naturally, the idea of a spectacle was exactly the point of the set design for the 5th game. Unlike the other games, the glass stepping stone game is watched by an audience. The participants have to cross the dangerous glass bridge as if they were walking along a rope. It's as if they were in a circus to perform a glamorous aerial show in front of the spectators. This is why the set is designed with a circus stage in mind. The bridge is located in the middle of a huge tent surrounded by layers of curtains. The color palette includes vivid green and purple from the 70s and 80s, and the bright colored lighting that is commonly used in the amusement park adds to the splendor. The game begins, and it becomes quite clear early on that time is precious. They only have 60 minutes, presumably due to the fact that they are 16 players. The emotional and psychological pressure is once again through the roof, because this time, the player's success or failure actively determines whether or not the other remaining players are going to survive. Not only do you have to save your own life, but you have to rely on others to make the right choice for you, and if they fail, the responsibility falls onto you. You're not allowed to fail during this game, not even once. One mistake means instant death. The stakes have literally never been higher. While the players are starting to make some progress, back in the VIP lounge, the disguised Detective Huang is serving drinks and one of the VIPs takes a liking to him. Despite a noticeable uncomfortableness, Detective Huang manages to keep his cool and invites the VIP to a private room. It is here that Huang finally reveals himself and forces the VIP to tell him everything about the Squid Game before he eventually knocks him out and disappears once more. I think this sequence of events only drives home the objectification the VIPs apply to everyone around them. Not at a single point in time does the VIP ask for Huang's consent. He literally claims him as his own and then proceeds to come on to him as if this was no issue. The man in the servant's uniform is nothing else but that. A servant in the most literal and objectifying sense of the word. And when Detective Huang begins to fight back, the VIP is shocked into silence and immediately complies with his demands because this kind of scenario was unimaginable to him.
Satisfied? If you can satisfy me in 5 minutes, I might let you leave.
Meanwhile, the number of contestants are dwindling. Religious guy 244, 6th in order, brings the whole game to a stop for a good time as he starts praying. He ends up pushing another contestant to his death before he himself is killed for wasting the player's time. We get a nice but tense little moment when it's time for Giyun to step onto the bridge and he can't remember which one was the first good tile, but luckily Sebyok helps him out.
왼쪽이야. 왼쪽이라고. 정신 차려.
I like this little moment because I think it's such a realistic reaction that one would be too caught up in the drama up front rather than remembering which was the correct tile. It also shows that Sebyok has fully come to open up and is prepared to help other players instead of ignoring them. Eventually, we reach the point at which Dok Su is the leader, and the once loud and proud gangster is now a terrified mess of a man. He's scared beyond belief and refuses to move. This is the ultimate moment of truth for Deok-soo as we fully see who he is. He's always been one of the most terrified contestants, but he tried to cover up his fears by being pompously aggressive and surrounding himself with yes men who would boost his ego instead of actually supporting him. Deok-soo has learned absolutely nothing by playing the games, and he refused to admit that it was okay to be scared and ask others for help. This is the fate of the man who has never learned what it means to be truly on one's own, fighting for existence, someone who was used to getting his way through violence and intimidation. But now, none of that is any use to him, and Deok-soo does the only thing he can think of. He refuses. He doesn't fail, he doesn't succeed, he simply refuses to move, and would thus rather doom himself and all others to die instead of facing reality. But there's one person who has seen through Deok-soo's bullshit from the very beginning. Min-yo steps forward and finally points out all the fear and weakness that Deok-soo has been trying to hide all this time, and she hasn't forgotten about her promise.
불알 두 쪽 달렸다고 온갖 폼은 다 잡더니 가네 못 가네. 아 씨발 쪽팔리게.
좆가 이 씨발려나. 네가 아무리 씹으려도 나 안 가.
덕수야, 너 같은 족밥 새끼랑 붙어 먹었던 게 정말 죽고 싶을 만큼 쪽팔리다.
그럼 먼저 가서 뒤지든가.
비켜.
정말 먼저 가겠다고?
그래. 나 한민여야. 여기서 너 같은 족밥 새끼처럼 병신같이 서 있다가 돼지지 않아.
In a move which I find both tragic and triumphant, Min-yo steps onto Deok-soo's tile, grabs him, and throws both of them off the bridge. There are now 4 remaining players: Gi-yoon, Se-byuk, Sang-woo, and one other man at the front who suddenly shows some promising skill. The man used to be a glass manufacturer and he thinks he's able to tell the difference between the tiles. Lucky for them, he's able to make some progress, but of course this wouldn't be Squid Game if the organizers didn't think of something to make this all even more horrible. Declaring the man's knowledge of glass an unfair advantage, the front man adjusts the lighting in the arena so that the man won't be able to tell the difference between the tiles any longer. This all feeds once again into the frontman's fallible idea of what equality and fairness actually mean. This all comes back to the inherent criticism against the capitalist system, which tells you that everyone has the equal opportunity to climb the social and financial ladder, but we all know it ain't like that. Especially since we see here that the glassmaker has advantage, which would help to make some progress, aka help him gain a higher rank in the system, but the people in charge won't have it. They refuse to let anyone enter their circle so easily, and instead of granting someone the advantage to help them succeed, they rather knock them back down and refuse them any opportunity to win. Because the system is run by the VIPs, it's not a fair system, and it very much fakes equality, because the rich entitled wankers decide who gets the win and who gets to lose, and the ones at the bottom can't do anything about it. With the game having been adjusted and the time running out, the glass manufacturer has no way of telling which final tile is safe to shoot. And it is here that Sang-woo decides to make his move.
모르겠어. 그럼 그냥 가.
Gi-yoon and Se-byuk look on with shocked expression. Sang-woo is unable to look them in the eyes. Instead, he walks to the end of the bridge, followed by the other two, and just in time the 3 of them manage to win the game. As the timer reaches 0, the glass bridge explodes into thousands of pieces, evidently hurting our 3 main contestants in the process. We end the episode with the VIPs applauding the winners, and Detective Hwang finally making his escape off the island as he's being followed by the frontman. This episode finally helps us to understand why everything has been happening the way it's been happening. It's not just simply a game of life and death. It's literally just a game for rich twats who want some entertainment and got nothing better to do than by watching the less fortunate kill themselves. There just had to be something more awful behind this whole death game thingy. And you know what? This makes a lot of sense, if you ask me. I mean, because of course no society would plan a game that's designed to actually help the poor and the ones who are struggling. Of course, a society or secret group wouldn't do that. This whole thing had to be life and death, because it's just some kind of sick entertainment because rich people get bored, I guess. So this whole Squid Game hasn't been designed to help the poor. It's just there so the rich people can look down upon those who wish to be like them, who are doing all of this to reach the same financial or social status, but that's never ever going to happen. And the rich just stand there and amuse themselves by not knowing that these people who they're watching will never ever get to the same level as them because they made it so. I already referred to this earlier, but this just shows how this whole system is rigged by those at the top. Like, the contestants never had a fair chance to begin with, because like information that is vital to them is knowingly kept from them. Like, there's an advantage that one player might have, but as soon as they have an advantage, they are eliminated. There are people who have become friends during those games, and they are purposefully pitted against each other because the organizers know this will be not only the better entertainment, but that it will psychologically break the players. And I think this is where the show takes on like an interesting meta level, if you think about it, because we as the viewers, we are like the VIPs. We watch those people risk their lives in order to win some money, and we are entertained by watching them, even though we know it's an awful thing that's happening to them. I mean, sure, most of us don't have like the financial or social status that the VIPs have, but that doesn't keep us from gaining the same kind of entertainment as them. Like, just as them, we maybe even bet on people who are going to win. We have specific people who we would like to see win. There are people who we dislike. There are people who we like. It's just really weird if you think about it, because we are the VIPs in this whole scenario, and the show is basically just kind of showing us, this is what even you are doing in this very moment. The fact that we pay to watch this show and then in a way demand to be entertained by it, I think says a lot about like the core message of Squid Game. Like, the show not only criticizes the capitalist society most of us live in, it also, like I said, holds up this mirror and shows us that we are much closer to the events and fates of the people that we see on the show than we would like to think. I mean, while we watch this show, we would like to identify, or we do identify with the contestants, and our position as the audience, though, is, if you think about it, much closer to the VIP. Like, just think about it. There are so many people, including me, who watch the show over and over again to be entertained, even though we know horrible things are happening. The fact that there is merchandise of the show that we buy, guilty. Like, the utter nonsense that is the cryptocurrency, which was based on this series. That's something that happened. Then the fact that shows like Wipeout and Takeshi's castle exist, which in theory and concept, if you think about it, are quite close to Squid Game. Basically, there just isn't the death part, but in theory, it's very close. All those things show us the true nature of what a series like Squid Game is trying to tell us, and how much society still has to learn if it ever wants to overcome its capitalist flaws. As we dive into the second to last episode, I want to divide the two storylines that unfold in this episode. So we're starting off with Detective Wang, who has managed to swim ashore and now desperately tries to get some reception so he can send all the incriminating evidence to the chief of police. Naturally, it ain't that easy, and the frontman is slowly but steadily catching up to him. Interestingly enough, the frontman wanted the guards to capture Detective Wang alive. I wonder why that is. Eventually, Detective Wang is cornered at the edge of a cliff, and the frontman, in a move to prove his good intentions, reveals himself to the detective. Naturally, the detective is shocked by this reveal, and it makes it all the more understandable why the frontman wanted him captured alive. He invites his brother to join him. He doesn't want him to get into any further trouble. But Detective Wang stays true to his priorities, and he refuses to join his brother. Realizing that his brother won't change his mind, and therefore can't be left running free, the frontman shoots Detective Wang, and he falls off the cliff. The detective is most likely dead, and the frontman returns to his office. We see him looking into a mirror in deep contemplation, and we actually watch him hallucinating his brother staring at him. And this is how the story of Detective Wang comes to a close. Now, many people have said the detective might not actually be dead at all, since we never see him actually die, and there could be the possibility of him returning for a second season, especially since the creator said that if he were to ever make another season, he would like to focus on the frontman. But honestly, since the creator did not have a second season in mind and doesn't plan on making one, I think we can assume that Detective Wang is dead by the end of the episode. And you could argue that his story seems somewhat disappointing or even pointless, because in the end the detective doesn't succeed in telling anyone of the deadly games, and he dies without anyone, except for his brother, knowing about him. However, I would argue that the investigation wasn't necessarily the point of Detective Wang's storyline. He served as our man on the inside. Through him we got a believable point of view character we could identify with as we observed the behind-the-scenes organizations of the Squid Game. The fact that it was an undercover policeman who he followed as a guard was a good choice, I think, because that makes it easier for the audience to sympathize with him, because we know Detective Wang isn't there for any financial or morally dubious reasons. He's a detective who wants to find his brother, so we have emotional stakes, and he wants to unearth the true horrors behind the Squid Game, so we have altruistic reasons to be invested in the investigation, because we would want the host and guards to be punished for organizing a death game. Just because Detective Wang fails at the very end doesn't make his entire story useless, because through him we got a greater understanding of the behind-the-scenes system, and how even the guards, just like the contestants, are objectified wheels in the machine who are simply there to make things work and ensure that the rich people get their entertainment. The only thing that I would point out was missing, in my opinion, was a greater focus or more detail on why some of the guards have chosen to work for the Squid Game. We see some of them organizing an illegal organ harvesting business, so I'm assuming the financial reward for them isn't that great, if they get any money for their work at all, that is. It would have been nice to see Detective Wang interact with some of the other guards more in order to get some background on some of the workers. Yes, I understand that the strict rules restricted them from saying anything, but we saw that some of the guards broke those rules. Maybe Detective Wang could have infiltrated the organ harvester group for a while longer and actually gotten close to one or two of those guards in order to find out how they came to be guards in the first place. We basically don't know anything about any of the guards. We only see how the working system functions, but we do not get to see who the people behind that system are. The only hints we get at the background story for one of the quote-unquote villains is the frontman, but only once it is revealed that he is Detective Wang's missing brother. Because we learned previously that the brother had won the Squid Game years earlier. This means that the frontman, at the previous point in time, had all the money he could dream of, had gone through a most horrific and traumatizing series of events. He experienced firsthand the horrors of the Squid Game. And yet, years later, he decided to work for the very people who had put him through a life and death game. Why? Why on earth would he do that? We can only speculate, especially if we take into consideration what we see in the very last episode. The old man mentions that both the rich and the poor eventually reach a point in life where nothing is interesting anymore. So we could assume that the front man, having won all the money he could ever dream of and fixing all the problems he had in life, ultimately made him realize that all the money didn't do anything for him. Perhaps, similar to Gi-Yoon, he went through a time of denial and guilt and didn't know what to do once he had won the Squid Game. But then he became rich, and his wealth did not manage to satisfy him. It did not make him happy. And since we know from an earlier episode that the Squid Game organizers have the participants chipped and are able to keep an eye on them even outside of the games, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that either the frontman at some point decided to contact the organizers again, or the organizers contacted him because they kept tabs on him and simply waited for the right opportunity to approach him. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if some, if not even all of the guards, are former contestants who have either won or decided not to return after the games had been terminated. Because as we see with Gi-Yoon later, you would not get out of the Squid Game experience with your psyche and emotions completely intact. You would definitely be traumatized to some degree. I would bet the organizers of the Squid Game continuously keep a close eye on anyone who has ever entered the games at some point, in the hopes that they could either re-invite them to play or recruit them for a behind-the-scenes position. They know how desperate the people who compete in the death games are. It would make sense that they keep their identities in their databases because they know it would be easy to get under their skin and recruit them again. So I'm assuming something along those lines happened to the frontman at some point. He must have reached a point in his life where he thought it was necessary to join the very people who have put him through hell. I totally understand why a possible second season would focus on the frontman. I think he's the character with the most potential, and it would be interesting to see what happens to other former players/winners of the Squid Game who are unable to let the past go. In a way, you could argue that the frontman is like Gi-Yoon, if Gi-Yoon turned to the dark side, and instead of fighting against the organizers, he joins them. In a way, the frontman is the polar opposite to Gi-Yoon. He was once a man in a similar desperate situation, but instead of taking the money and experience and utilizing them in a satisfying way, he becomes even more desperate and decides to become part of the system which has previously tortured him. Speaking of which, let's return to the actual games. Our last 3 remaining contestants are brought back into the now empty warehouse. This is when we get one of the most important and best scenes. The first major clash between Gi-Yoon and Sang-woo. Shocked by Sang-woo's homicidal actions, Gi-Yoon questions why he did it, saying that it was the last tile and the glassmaker was about to move. But Sang-woo ain't having it and defends himself by pointing out that Gi-Yoon didn't have to take action because of his final position, and the glassmaker had refused to share his knowledge earlier, therefore endangering all other contestants. The last argument is actually a good point if you ask me, but that's beside the point because now we are getting to the core of this fight.
어쨌든 너나 나나 다 그 사람 덕에 다리 끝까지 살아서 간 거야.
씨발 형은 모르겠지만 내가 아직 살아있는 건 그놈 덕이 아니야. 내가 살아있는 건 내가 살아남으려고 죽을 힘을 다했기 때문이야.
아무리 이유로 갖다 붙여봐야 넌 그냥 죄 없는 사람을 죽인 거야.
정신 차려!
What we see here is 2 moral opposites completely clashing as the 2 major emotional cores of Gi-Yoon and Sang-woo come to the forefront. Sang-woo believes that he only came as far as he did because of its clever scheming, and to a certain degree, he's obviously right about that. Sure, you could argue that he played dirty and cheated and betrayed his way through the games, but if we're being honest, he never broke any of the game's actual rules, and he was pushed into extreme circumstances where it means either you or the others survive. there's no middle ground. And wouldn't you agree that you'd rather try and protect yourself first than looking out for anyone else? I think Sang-woo perfectly embodies that typical idea of the capitalist economy, a system which encourages people to use and outplay others in order to get ahead in life. Basically saying that you will have to, in this case literally, step over other people's corpses if you ever want to achieve success. It is that rather egotistical, entitled viewpoint which Sang-woo already had at the start of the game, but it was only amplified by the extreme circumstances he found himself in. I'm not saying that he's completely wrong, because the fact of the matter is that's how many parts of society work for the large part. Working with others only gets you so far, and capitalism will only allow you to be successful if you use other people for your own benefit and realize when to let someone drop so you can climb up instead of them. But Gi-hun points out the different side of the argument. They wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for the glassmaker and all the other people. All those other 453 contestants had to die, and all of our main 3 characters to get to this point. There can't be winners without losers. What Sang-woo fails to realize is that, yes, his skills did get him this far, but he not only had to make other people lose, he also had to use them and even work together with them. He couldn't have won tug of war without the old man's advice and Ki-hun's leadership. He got through the glass stepping stone game because the others in front of him literally made a path for him, which he then used for himself, meaning he benefited from the hard work of other people, which he then exploited in order to literally step over their dead bodies and claim the dead player's reward. The only actual individual act during glass stepping stones was him pushing the other man, once again using someone else in order to gain something for himself. Sang-woo even tries to claim the moral high ground.
운 좋게 제일 뒷자리를 뽑더니 마음이 아주 너그러워지셨네. 어차피 우리가 저 돈 가지고 나가려면 다른 놈들 다 죽어야 돼. 형 손에 피 안 묻히게 해줬으면 오히려 고마워해야 되는 거 아니야?
But Gi-hun asks an important and heart-stopping question.
그게 나일 수도 밀었을 거냐?
씨발, 기훈이 형!
He basically calls out Sang-woo's faulty morality, because it is easier for Sang-woo to manipulate and use people he's barely known. He doesn't have any true emotional attachment to them. But Gi-hun is his childhood friend. They've known each other for literal decades. They have an actual history. It's easy for Sang-woo to say that he did the dirty work by killing someone he has never known, but would he have done the same thing if Gi-hun had been the one in front of him? Moralities aren't simply black and white like that. Sang-woo can't argue that he's the emotionally detached genius who schemed his way through the games, because there are always moments and possibilities where things could have gone differently. Sang-woo seems to realize that as well, because he's unable to answer Gi-hun's question, and instead shifts into accusation mode, pointing out Gi-hun's naive nature and simple way of thinking. And what I like here is that Gi-hun totally accepts that. He knows that he isn't perfect, that he's gone through a lot of unnecessary trouble in his life, and that the major reason for his financial and emotional struggles in his life is himself. And it is here that he points out the main flaw of Sang-woo's character, his elitism.
그런데 쌍문동의 자랑 서울대 천재 조상우는 여기서 왜 이러고 있을까? 나 같은 병신 새끼랑 똥밭에서 뒹굴면서 그것도 내 탓이냐?
Why did he still end up playing these deadly kids games? Because at the end of the day, Sang-woo isn't that different compared to Gi-hun. They are stuck in the same deadly game because of their shitty life circumstances. Them being here together in that warehouse brings them both down to the same level. Here, Sang-woo can't pretend to be of some higher class, because if he was so much better, why did he end up just like the dumb Gi-hun and all the other contestants who were here with them? This entire scene between the two of our main leads is the perfect emotional moral prelude to what we will see in the final episode, because this argument between the two sets up everything we need to know going forward. It makes the two moral oppositions completely clear, and serves as the final point of development in these characters' emotional journey throughout the show. Both are staying true to their initial principles, but through the extremity and trauma of the deadly games, their moralities have only been intensified because they are pushed to the maximum emotional breaking point where they either snap or double down. Our three main contestants are then given dashing new outfits, and we follow Se-byung as she prepares for the fancy dinner affair. Unfortunately, it is here that we see that, following the explosion of the stepping stone bridge, a large glass shard has penetrated her abdomen. It is clear that the wound will prove to be fatal, but for now Se-byok manages to clean herself up, and she returns to the warehouse, where a big, elegant feast has been prepared for the contestants. I don't know to which degree this was intentional, but the design of the triangular dining table is very reminiscent of the 1979 artwork The Dinner Party by Judy Chicago. The piece is regarded as a major feminist artwork and intends to represent the history of women in civilization. I'm not gonna pretend like I know anything about art history or how to properly judge/interpret art pieces. Heck, I don't even know if the production designer intended any deeper meaning other than the representation of a fancy dinner table that exudes rich elitist energy. The only thing I would maybe put out there is that the art piece could possibly refer to Se-byok, who is the main female character in the show and will soon meet her end. Maybe you could argue, since the original artwork featured elements that represent women's history and achievements, this indirectly tries to subtly shift the focus onto Se-byok, who has lived through an adventurous and traumatizing history and continuously perseveres because of her skills and personality. You're welcome to disagree or tell me your own interpretation in the comments. I just thought I'd point out the similarities between the set and the art piece. I think the main intention of this dinner scene is that the organizers want to give the remaining players another incentive. It's basically a bait, wherein they give the contestants a taste of the high-class life they could have if they managed to win the money. You could argue that this also plays into this idea of benevolence and mercy the host of the game expresses, similar to what I spoke about earlier when the design of the coffins came up. It's like the game organizers are being generous and allow the players to take a break by feeding them with nice food. But naturally, this only happens because the rich organizers allow the lower class players to catch a glimpse at a nice life. And naturally, they expect something in return. They expect to be entertained, because this game isn't done yet. That's why the dinner ends with the guards taking everything off the table, except for the knives, right in front of each player. And of course, they all take it. It's like at this point, it doesn't even need to be said. They all know what this comes down to. If they weren't on opposite sides, it resembles a silent agreement, as they all accept the fact that at least one of them will be killed very soon. And soon enough, nighttime falls, and our three remaining contestants sit on each of their beds, with the silence of the warehouse weighing upon them. I think this is a good point to finally point out the one remaining detail of the warehouse set: the walls. Now that all the beds are gone, you can plainly see that all of the games which the contestants had to play were right there in front of them the whole time. Especially if you consider that trying to figure out what the next game was going to be was a constant point of discussion whenever the players got together. It's almost like the organizers were mocking the contestants by putting the valuable information right in front of their noses, but the players were, understandably, quite distracted by all the death and emotional trauma. You could also argue that the contestants were way too focused on the money and their own personal conflicts instead of actually noticing what was going on around them and realizing all they needed was right there. Eventually, Sang-woo has seemingly fallen asleep, and Gi-hun approaches Se-byok. He assures her that he doesn't mean to harm her. He wants to help her, having realized that something isn't right with her.
너 어디가 안 좋아 보이던데.
아니야. 괜찮아.
그런데 음식은 왜 그렇게 남겼어?
그냥 맛이 별로라서.
거짓말하지 마.
The two get to talking, and they have a conversation which is reminiscent of the dialogue between Se-byok and Ji-young in the Marble episode, but now we see how much Se-byok has changed and emotionally grown, since she is much more willing to tell Gi-hun about her family and expresses honest interest in Gi-hun's life. He tells her about his debt, his sick mother, and his wish to be a good father to his daughter, and in return Se-byok tells him about her brother in the children's home. Having long realized that only one of them will be able to get out of the games alive, she proposes that if either of them wins, they take care of the other one's family.
나랑 약속 하나만 해.
무슨 약속?
아저씨든 나든 둘 중 한 명이 살아서 여기 나가면 서로 남은 가족 챙겨주기로.
She wants Gi-hun to promise, but he actually never agrees out loud. Instead, we see him staring off into the distance. He watches Sang-woo having fallen asleep, and he takes this as an opportunity to take out his knife and end him. But Sebyok holds him back and rightfully points out that Gi-yoon isn't a murderer.
그러지 마. 아저씨는 그런 사람 아니잖아.
I can't even imagine what would have happened if Gi-yoon had walked over there. He probably would have just stared at his former friend, unable to actually do the deed. Especially since this would call back to the very argument he made against Sang-woo earlier, when he asked him if he would have killed the person in front of him if it had been Gi-yoon. I very much doubt that Gi-yoon would ever be able to intentionally kill anyone, least of all an old friend, and that will become very clear as the finale draws closer. Meanwhile, Sebyok's condition is getting worse and worse, so Gi-yoon runs off to the warehouse entrance, desperately trying to get the guards' attention so they may help Sebyok. Eventually, the door actually opens, but the guards who enter are carrying a coffin. And that's the moment when Gi-yoon turns around and just sees, in the distance, especially since you could argue the moment is very much underplayed. It literally happens off-screen. We follow Gi-yoon's perspective, so we are just as shocked as him when the camera turns around and all we see is Sang-woo holding a knife. The realization immediately sinks in, and we can do nothing but watch Gi-yoon completely losing it. In a flash of rage, he even attempts to attack Sang-woo, but is stopped by the guards who push him to the ground. And I think it's that shot of Gi-yoon's face while he stares at his former friend drenched in the blood of the young woman he had come to care for, who is now discarded in the coffin. This is the moment he breaks. And I think it's fantastic sound design that we don't hear any of the words or noises of the characters as soon as Gi-yoon has realized that Sebyok is gone and he lashes out at Sang-woo. It's just the music doing its thing, and we just get to experience Gi-yoon's absolute agony as we have to watch him break. The only other sound we hear during that moment is Gi-yoon crying as he watches Sebyok's corpse being carried away. It's a fantastically crafted scene and perfectly expresses the emotional rage and desperation that must be going on inside of our main character. Wow, this episode is just one emotional gut punch after the other. I think episode 8 delivers on like many of the moral and emotional developments our main characters have gone through, and I think this serves as like a perfect setup for what is about to transpire in the finale. I already spoke about Detective Hwang's story and his connection to the frontman who turns out to be this brother, and while, to be honest here, I don't think it's not a 100% satisfying like conclusion to the storyline. It's one that definitely makes sense to me. And I don't think it goes against like Detective Hwang's development or core of who he is or what he did, because sometimes you fail, but that doesn't mean that your story was pointless. Besides, I think it implies much more about like who the frontman is and how the behind-the-scenes system works, since we now know who the frontman really is, and it sort of explains some things without 100% revealing everything. So it leaves some stuff to the imagination where you can come up with your own theories as to how the frontman ended up being the frontman, or what happened to Detective Hwang, or what happened to the frontman / the brother after he won the Squid Game initially. So there's a lot left to the imagination here. One of my absolute favorite scenes in the entire series is like this first fight between Gi-yoon and Sang-woo, because it perfectly demonstrates like the clash of moralities that it is all going to come down to at the very end of the series. Like, it's two former friends with two opposing views, two opposing moralities, who are both like pushed to extremes, who are pushed to the very brink of almost, insanity, you could argue. And I think this perfectly sets up like the emotional weight that all of us feel during the final game. I would also like to point out that many people have like doomed Sang-woo to be the ultimate like antagonist because he's cheated, he's betrayed good characters, he's killed people, and therefore we are definitely meant to hate him. And we like to think that Gi-yoon has like the moral high ground in this. Like, he's always altruistic, and in a way, we like to think that we are just as forthcoming and altruistic as him. But this is not how real life works. And I think a lot of people, when they like doom Sang-woo to be the bad guy, are somewhat in denial. Like, for us as the audience, we know that it's easy to like sort of take the moral high ground and agree with Gi-yoon and doom Sang-woo. But just like imagine it, if you were in the same situation, if you were put into the situation of life and death, where it meant it's either you or the others, where you would have to maybe even cheat your friend, or someone you've known for like a couple of days, if it meant you like had to kill someone else so you can survive, I'm telling you, most of us would definitely do that, because the audience or many of us like to think, oh, we're definitely like Gi-yoon. We would definitely be like Gi-yoon. We would like to be like Gi-yoon, but the fact of the matter is, most of us would be like Sang-woo. Like, you would try anything to stay alive, because what are the lives of 455 people you barely or don't even know at all compared to your own? Like, your survival instinct would just kick in, and you would do anything in order to stay alive, even if it meant you had to cheat or maybe even kill someone, if it came down to it. So I think that many people are not being entirely true with themselves, I think, if they like condemn what Sang-woo has done. I know he is meant to be the antagonist and he did horrible things, but if you think about it, if you think about the situation, I think a lot of us would act like him, even though naturally we would like to think that we're like Gi-yoon, but that's not what it's always like. And that brings me to another thing which is often highly discussed, namely the fact that Sebyok dies and doesn't go on to win the Squid Game, because a lot of people really, really wanted her to win. Like, many people expected or wanted her to win and say that it was like a huge plot contrivance that she happened to be killed by like this enormous glass shard stuck in her abdomen. And while I have to agree that like sort of the way she's eliminated, the way she dies, is maybe somewhat contrived, I do think it was the better choice to have her die and let Sang-woo and Gi-yoon be the final players. Like, I get why so many people wanted her to succeed. She has arguably the saddest backstory out of all the characters, and you want her to be finally happy. You want her to save her mother, and you want her whole family to finally be together. You feel like that she deserves to win. But this isn't about deserving to win. It never has been. Like, Sang-woo got here because he schemed and cheated his way and exploited the system for his own benefit. That's how he got to this point. And Gi-yoon got to this point mostly because of sheer luck, if we're being honest. Because this is sadly how society works. It's not fair. It's not about equality. And the system almost never rewards you simply because you deserve to win. that's kind of the sad reality of Sibyok's death. Sometimes life isn't fair, and the people who deserve to win don't win. That's how it often is for many people. And besides, if personally, I would think that it wouldn't have made sense for her to be in the final fight if you like really only have like two people sort of playing the final game. Like, it only really made sense for Sang-woo and Gi-yoon to have the final battle. Like, they set these two up perfectly to have like these two moralities clash. If it had been Sang-woo and Sibyok, for example, it wouldn't nearly have had the same like emotional and moral impact, because those two haven't really like interacted that much, and they don't share like a personal history, and I don't think it would have hit as hard if these two had been the final contestants. And if it had been Sibyok and Gi-yoon, it definitely would have been, I think, an emotional experience, but again, it would not make the same point as like the two clashing moralities of Gi-yoon and Sang-woo. Because if you have Gi-yoon and Sibyok being the final contestants, what would most likely happen is that either Gi-yoon would say, okay, I'm not going to fight you because I don't want to, just kill me and get the money and save your family. Or the two of them would realize that they can't kill each other and they agree to terminate the games and they leave. Like, in the end, both of them would go home without the money, without really having achieved anything, kind of. And we just watch them go home and no one has the money. And you would have to agree that that is somewhat disappointing if at the end of all this no one goes home with the money. So while I understand why people really wanted Sibyok to win, I think it was the right choice to have Sang-woo and Gi-yoon be the final contestants, because the way it was set up for these two men to be the final players was done perfectly, and I think the show wouldn't really be able to drive like its core themes and messages home if it didn't have Gi-yoon versus Sang-woo at the very end. The games are cruel because capitalist society is cruel, and that's just how it is. Like, it hurts to accept reality, but in the end I think it was the right choice to end episode 8 with Sibyok dying and having the final showdown be Gi-yoon and Sang-woo. I would like to tell you a story. There once was a man called Mr. Kim, who made a living as a rickshaw man, a job which didn't always earn him the money he needed. He was married, and his wife liked to enjoy a bowl of oxbone soup, so Mr. Kim hoped to bring her favorite meal whenever he could. However, his wife became ill, coughing uncontrollably and being unable to get up. Mr. Kim wasn't always the most understanding husband, blaming his wife for messing up the food and shouting at her for petty reasons. All the wife wanted is to have another bowl of her favorite soup. Mr. Kim hadn't made any money for a good couple of days, so his spirits weren't high. But as good luck would have it, several people suddenly sought out Mr. Kim's services, and he was able to make some good money within a short time. He did remember that his wife had asked him not to go out that day, so his mood was somewhat dulled, but with even more customers coming his way, Mr. Kim decided to go about his business. Intending to celebrate his unexpected earnings, he visited a bar and got in a good night of drinking, even though the ominous thoughts of his wife kept sneaking up on him. Having finished his drinking session, Mr. Kim eventually made his way home, but not before buying the oxbone soup his wife desired so much. But then, when he returned, he was greeted by an eerily quiet home. He found his wife, dead, with their young baby sitting at her side, sucking the mother's nipple. Mr. Kim's lucky day ended with him crying, holding on to the face of his deceased wife. The story you just heard was an abridged version of Hyun Jin-young's short story One Lucky Day, published in 1924, and I would like you to keep the story well in mind, as we move on to Squid Game's final episode. The finale opens with a shot of the Squid Game playing field harking back to the very first episode of the series. Our two finalists are welcome to the final game, for which Gi-hun decides to play offense, just as we saw him do it in the opening narration. Then we enter the arena, and it's the same place where the first game was played days ago. The story comes full circle at this very point. It is no longer about survival and the need for money. This is going to be personal. It's about morals and personal ideals. We are reminded of the rules of the game, with a special focus on the likely possibility of a player not being able to continue, meaning, should one of them die, the other one wins automatically. The frontman reiterates for the VIPs and the audience that the Squid Game is a very physical competition. There's no restriction on violence. As Gi-hun and Sang-woo take their positions, I felt oddly reminded of a Western showdown, with the two opposing forces finally dueling to the death, as they stand facing each other, waiting for the carnage to begin.
Among all the games that kids played back then, it was the most physical and violent.
The game begins, and Gi-hun starts off like an absolute badass as he plays it dirty, quite literally, as he blinds Sang-woo momentarily by throwing sand at him. And then, as Gi-hun is given full range of movement, the dramatic spectacle reaches its full potential as the clouds above them have gathered, thunder roars, and rain starts to fall. You can't get a better ambience for a final showdown. Sang-woo justifies his murder of Se-byok by pointing out that he knew that Gi-hun would have tried to terminate the games in order to save her, meaning Sang-woo wouldn't have had the chance to win the money. However, Gi-hun rightfully points out that he would have tried to kill Sang-woo had Se-byok not held him back. While I personally think that Gi-hun hasn't changed too much from where he started, if we take a look at his moral values, I would argue that he has transformed in regards to how he immediately reacts to things around him. At the start of the show, he was very much passive and avoidant, didn't try to get into any trouble, and avoided violence and conflict whenever he could. But now he can't do that anymore, and he doesn't want to. The two men start fighting, and it's as uncoordinated and dirty as it could possibly get. It's raw, and you can feel every punch and every slash. We even get a glimpse at the VIPs watching the spectacle in front of them, making it absolutely clear that these are men who look down upon the others as if they are animals tearing themselves apart for the VIPs' entertainment. Gi-hun and Sang-woo keep going at it, even when they start showing signs of exhaustion. Neither of them is prepared to back down. At this point, they have completely forgotten about the money and about the rules of the game. Either of them could win by completing the Squid Game according to its rules. They don't have to kill each other, but that's no longer the point. Elimination is the goal now. This is similar to what we saw in the very first episode, when Gi-hun kept losing the Dakji game, but once he had managed to win it, he immediately went for the physical revenge instead of asking for the original prize. The fight is slowly drawing to a close as Gi-hun gets his hand stabbed and manages to make a comeback. He's now letting out all of his rage and frustration, saying that Sang-woo is the one who killed all of those other contestants.
네가 죽인 거잖아. 네가 죽였어. 네가 죽였어. 네가 죽인 거야.
I do have to wonder how much of that statement is directed at Sang-woo and how much is directed at himself. It could very well be that Gi-hun at this point in time already starts to feel the guilt of all the others who have died. Because Gi-hun is responsible for the death of other players. He played tug of war with Sang-woo and he cheated during the marble game and killed the old man. Neither Gi-hun nor Sang-woo are innocent. They have both come this far because they have directly and indirectly caused the death of others. But this is where it all ends. Gi-hun is about to deliver the final blow. He doesn't want to kill Sang-woo. He doesn't want any of this any longer. Just as he's about to win the game, Gi-hun turns around and says he wants to stop right here. He recalls rule number 3, saying the game can be terminated if him and Sang-woo agree to do so. Gi-hun offers Sang-woo his hand, and the other man is about to agree.
미안해. 상우야. 상우야.
If Giyun wasn't broken before, he certainly is now. He never wanted to truly kill his childhood friend. This is not how he wanted this to end. But Sang-woo would not give him that choice. The White House is deserted, the VIPs are gone, and all the money is in the piggy bank. We see the frontman taking Giyun home in the limousine, almost as if now that Giyun has won the game and became a rich man, has immediately reached some sort of higher status which gives him the privilege to sit in this car. And as if the metaphor hadn't been entirely clear since the very first episode when we saw Giyun betting on horses, the frontman openly admits that contestants were nothing more like horses on a racetrack. Giyun demands to know who the man is he's talking to, but he's gassed once more and brought back to his hometown. The first thing he does is to check his account balance, and lo and behold, there are the 45.6 billion won. Looking beaten down and exhausted, Giyun walks through the street and encounters Sang-woo's mother. He isn't able to say anything, and the old lady, taking pity on him, gives him some free food for his mother, and asks if he has heard from Sang-woo recently. And I think it's absolutely heartbreaking that the camera doesn't show us Sang-woo's mum, but instead shows us every moment of Giyun's reaction as he has to listen to her words. You can just feel the emptiness and pain which he must be experiencing. Finally, Giyun returns to his home looking for his mother. He finds her lying on the floor of the bedroom. This is the final punch to the gut. Giyun holds on to her, asks her to open her eyes, even says that he finally managed to make some money, the whole reason for why he was gone. But there's no use.
돌아가시고 기훈이가 옆에 눕잖아요.
워낙에 이제 기훈이 자체의 감정까지도 다 써버린 그런 상태여서 일반적으로 뭐 만약에 그런 장면을 찍는다 그러면 뭐 막 펑펑 울면서 엄마 뭐 하면서 막 오열하고 뭐 이럴 것 같은데
이미 기훈이는 너무 많은 슬픔을 겪었고 너무 많은 죽음을 목격한 이후라 아무것도 남아있지 않은 껍데기 같은 사람일 거라고 생각을 했어요.
이렇게 가슴에 손을 이렇게 하시더라고요. 이렇게 이제 전 너무 아파가지고 서러움 이런 것도 없어졌고 이미 이제 그 감정이 너무 근데 이해가 가더라고. 어떤 기훈 입장에서도 짠한 느낌에.
제가 거기다 이제 추가시켰던 거는 나중에 엄마 나 돈 벌어 왔어라는 말을 하나.
나 돈 벌어 왔어.
제목도 운수 좋은 날로 했고요. 그 회에.
Now think back to the story I told you earlier. This was supposed to be Giyun's lucky day. He made the money he needed in order to afford the medical treatment for his mother. He even brought her some food. But it all vanishes into nothingness. The whole reason for Giyun returning to play the game so that he could take care of his mum means nothing now. A whole year goes by, and Giyun looks worse than we have ever seen him before. He's meeting up with some fancy bank manager who tells us that Giyun has barely touched his money, and he wants him to offer a new financial deal with VIP privileges. And you know what? I think this is exactly where the recruitment for the rich wankers we saw earlier begins. I wouldn't be too surprised if those people at the top kept an eye on everyone who had any larger amount of money, especially if they became rich because of the Squid Game. Those people have their eyes and ears everywhere. You can't escape them. It honestly doesn't surprise me that the wealthy are in charge of everything, because they search for the poor bastards that would sign up for the Squid Game, and then they still keep an eye on those who won because they know with all the prize money they can now ascend to the VIP status. It's one messed up, toxic capitalist system. But Giyun ain't having it. He immediately ends the conversation and even asks if he can borrow 10,000 won, further implying that he has neither touched nor learned to use his fortune. And this is where I would like to talk about Giyun's trauma. Because some people have given him a lot of shit for basically wasting one entire year. He doesn't get Sebyok's brother out of the children's home, he presumably wasn't in touch with his daughter, he didn't talk to Sang-woo's mother, and he generally just didn't take care of himself and simply went on to ignore the money. I honestly think that people who believe that Giyun wasted a year don't seem to properly understand the psychological and emotional damage this man must feel every single day. He went through some really traumatizing shit in a very short amount of time. The entire show happens in the span of about a week. Just ask yourself what kind of emotional scarring that would leave behind if you had to live through several life and death games. See multiple people you cared for die, cause the death of several of those people, watch your childhood friend commit murder before your very eyes, Then you have to fight their friend to the death, only for him to end up killing himself. And when you return home to your mother, for whom you did all of this in the first place, and you find out that she died while you were gone. Just let all of that sink in. Think really hard about all the events you saw in the previous episodes and imagine the immense guilt, shame, sadness, anger, and whatever other emotion you can think of which must be scraping away at Giyun's psyche. That man isn't well. He's emotionally broken beyond repair. He carries the deaths of several hundreds of people and suffers from immense survivor's guilt. The money he owns now is literally blood money. Don't tell me you wouldn't feel bad about using it. Especially if you take into consideration that Giyun couldn't even use that money anymore for his initial intent, namely helping his mother. After everything he went through, he comes home, looking forward to seeing his mother, but she has passed away. Add the mother's death plus the loss of the money's use to the immense pile of psychological pain that Giyun suffered in the span of only a few days. And people try to argue that he wasted a year. Considering all of that trauma, it's honestly a miracle that he starts becoming better after talking to the old man. Giyun basically spent his time in an emotional coma, unable to escape the guilt and shame. I can't even imagine living in a society as focused on money and capitalism as ours right now, and have the money to make a good living, but I wouldn't dare to because every time I'm faced with any financial issues, I would be reminded of all the people who died so I could be rich. So I don't want to hear anything about Giyun wasting time and not doing anything, because people who say that don't understand the impact mental illness can have on your life. We then see Giyun on his own, drinking and staring into the distance. A woman selling flowers approaches him and he decides to buy one. Attached to the flower he finds a note, which looks eerily similar to the Squid Game's calling card, and written on it are the words, "From your gunbu." The note directs him to a meetup point, and it is here that we are hit with the final surprise. Giyun quickly realized that the old man was responsible for the entirety of the Squid Game. The old man invites him to play one final game. There's a drunk man outside, and they bet on whether or not someone will come to help him within the next half hour. Il-nam asks if Giyun still trusts people, even after everything he's experienced playing the deadly games.
아직도 사람을 믿나 그 일을 겪고도.
He knows that Giyun hasn't touched the prize money and says he has the right to use it because he earned it through luck and hard work. When Giyun asks why he organized the Squid Game in the first place, the old man replies by saying that both the poor and the mega rich have no fun in living their lives.
사는 게 재미가 없다는 거야. 돈이 너무 많으면은 아무리 뭘 사고 먹고 마셔도 결국 다 시시해져 버려.
And while I believe he's making somewhat of a valid point here, he then goes on to ruin it by basically saying that they watched people die because they thought it might be entertaining. If you have all the money in the world, everything becomes boring at a certain point. There's no joy in life anymore. So the old man gathered all his clients and rich friends and they tried to think of something that would bring them fun. Naturally, Giyun can't believe what he's hearing, but then Il-nam points out that he never forced anyone to play the game.
나는 아무에게도 게임을 강요한 적이 없어. 자네도 제 발로 다시 돌아오지 않았나.
And that is, in pure theoretical sense, maybe true, but we all know in reality it ain't that easy. Because the old man was very well aware of who he sought out to play those games. He knew how to manipulate the contestants and play with their greed and deepest desires. We see in episode 2 that most of the people didn't really have a choice. Their lives were so screwed that there was no way other than re-entering the games for the opportunity to win some money. In some cases, it literally meant either death or playing the games. So I don't think you can say with 100% accuracy that everyone played the games out of their own free will. And perhaps this is something Il-Nam can't understand, because how could he? With the wealth he has, why would he be truly able to understand why someone like Gi-hun would feel forced to play the games? When asked why he himself joined the game, the old man reminisces about his childhood, saying he had so much fun as a child playing all those games with his friends, forgetting about all other worries. He wanted to feel like that one more time before he died.
관중석에 앉아서는 절대로 느낄 수 없는 그 기분을 말이야.
And for those who would say that the old man basically risked his own life by entering the game, that's not entirely true. Because throughout the entire series there are hints and details which reveal that there was more to the old man than meets the eye, and that he was never truly in danger. During Red Light Green Light, the doll didn't register his movement. In episode 2, when all the contestants were gassed as they entered the van, we never saw the old man getting the same treatment. When the nightly carnage broke out and the old man begged for it to stop, the front man reacted immediately. During Tug of War, all the contestants are tied to the rope with a lock, but there's no lock around the old man's handcuffs. The old man recognized the neighborhood set during the marble game because it was built after his old neighborhood. When he was eventually eliminated, we never saw him get shot like all the others. And finally, most, if not even all of the games, were games which were especially popular decades ago during a time when Il-Nam would have played them. It all comes full circle here. The old man just wanted to be a kid again, but he was never really in any danger. And that's part of the reason why he let Gi-hun live, because it was so much fun playing with him, just like it used to be in the good old days. As the half hour runs out, Gi-hun looks out the window and sees that the drunk man is picked up by a police car, which a previously passing pedestrian had called. The clock strikes midnight, and Il-Nam dies on the spot, presumably having seen that he had lost their bet. Now this final twist got a lot of people talking. While I personally wasn't surprised at all when the old man was revealed to still be alive and actually in charge of the games, I still thought it was a well done twist because it made sense to me. I think many people got upset because they feel like this twist is supposed to serve as a misdirect of the old man's character, as if the show wants to pull the rug out from under us and say, see, the guy you liked was actually super evil the whole time. And while I do think that this is partly the intention, it isn't the major point of the reveal. This whole scene serves to show us two things. The whole reason why the games happened in the first place, and it shows us that Gi-hun still hasn't lost his trust in humanity. Il-Nam isn't some moustache-twirling villain, he is the epitome of all the issues that we saw personified within the VIPs. It shows that he believes himself to be in touch with the poor. He thinks that the unhappiness that comes from having everything he could want in the world is the same as the unhappiness people experience because they are poor and literally can't afford the most important things you need to live. How wealthy and elitist do you have to be so out of touch with reality? This is a man who has fully benefited from the capitalist system that he himself helped to further strengthen, and he has the audacity to tell this once poor and now emotionally broken man that he shouldn't feel bad about using money which was literally made from dead people. Instead of honestly trying to change something about his own life, or perhaps help those in need, or use his money in any other meaningful way, the old man helped organize games of life and death simply because he wanted to have some fun. This shows that the capitalist elitism which is in charge of society has lost all touch with the people who are not as well off as the 1%. Gi-hun finally decides to dare a new beginning, and what would be better than doing that by getting a fresh haircut. He gets what might be the most controversial restyling in all of TV. Next time we see him, he wears a nice suit and sports fiery red hair. I know it looks silly, but the creator has said that the colour is meant to symbolize all the anger and rage Gi-hun still carries with him, and I think that's a good point. Besides, after everything Gi-hun has gone through, it makes sense that he would go through a radical change once he manages to get his head back in the game. Anyway, he finally picks up Sevyok's brother from the children's home and asks Sang-woo's mother to take care of him, even giving her a vast sum of money to support her. We then see him on the tube, but then he spots the familiar figure of the businessman playing Dak-chi with another poor soul. And his shock kicks in immediately as he runs off but fails to reach the businessman in time. He takes the familiar calling card from the Dak-chi player and urges him to never contact them. The final scene of Squid Game brings us to an airport, where we see Gi-yoon about to board a plane to the US to see his daughter. But then he is reminded of the calling card and he decides to phone them. He tells them that he is not a racing horse and demands to know who the people are who commit such atrocities. He is urged to just board the plane, but Gi-yoon says he can't forgive them.
그래서 난 용서가 안 돼. 너희들이 하는 짓이. 그 비행기를 타. 그게 당신한테 좋을 거야.
And this final decision might be the most controversial event of the entire series, because a lot of people don't understand why Gi-yoon would walk away from seeing his daughter and instead choose to stay and fight. And while I can't understand where those people are coming from, I have to point out that this final decision is the ultimate defining moment for Gi-yoon's character. Because that's who he is. He almost never puts his own needs first. He is constantly considerate of other people's wishes and needs, even if it means that he sabotages himself. Think back. Gi-yoon missed the birth of his own daughter because he chose to stay behind and help his co-workers. He gave the cat some food even though he could barely afford food for himself. He chooses to play with the old man even though he knows that it's a strategically bad move. He agrees to giving the other player the #1 spot because he doesn't want to ruin the man's choice. This is who Gi-yoon is. He's altruistic and outright avoidant of conflict to a fault, so much so that he knowingly puts himself into unnecessary trouble. But Gi-yoon would rather make a fool out of himself than watch another person suffer. And I can hear you say, but the whole point of his character was that he wanted to be a good dad and get enough money so he can financially support his daughter. And yes, that is very much a core element of Gi-yoon's character, the love for his family. And yes, I admit that it is somewhat of an unfair move that he cancels the meeting with his daughter because he wants to fight bad guys. But like I said, we've seen that Gi-yoon has done the same thing over and over again. It doesn't go against his character or any of the behavior we've seen from him. Besides, it's not like his daughter is in any danger or struggling or anything like that. His daughter does have a good life. She lives with her mother and her stepdad, who are both loving parents and are able to financially provide for her. Gi-yoon not seeing her now, or earlier for that matter, doesn't actively make her living conditions worse. Essentially, Gi-yoon does the exact opposite of what the organizers of the Squid Game wanted from their contestants. He abandons his own personal self-centered needs and instead pushes his own ego aside in order to help others. I can understand why you would be frustrated with this ending, but I don't think you can make the argument that this makes no sense whatsoever, because it is the epitome of everything we've seen Gi-yoon say and do during the entirety of the show. I'll be honest, when I watched this episode for the first time and saw that they were going to start right away with the final fight between Gi-yoon and Sang-woo, I wonder what the hell they were going to do to fill the rest of the episode. But they did not disappoint. In fact, I'm glad that they showed us the aftermath of the Squid Game. I'm so glad that they explored the psychological trauma that such an experience would leave behind. And I think Gi-yoon's behavior during that 1 year of emotional coma made so much sense to me. I wish that maybe we would have seen even more of his life after the games, not just jump straight to 1 year later, but let's see how the trauma actually manifests, how parts of Gi-yoon's life and character have changed because of his survivor skill. I would have liked to see more of a development there, more of a detailed look at his life. But in the end, if you think about it, he didn't, deep down, he didn't really change. He stayed true to his principles and his moralities up until the very end. And sure, some people could argue that Gi-yoon didn't go through any kind of character development, but character development doesn't necessarily have to mean that a person really needs to fundamentally change. Sometimes character development can also just mean that a person doubts their beliefs and their moralities, and through the experience, through the trauma, their beliefs are strengthened. which is more like a focus on an emotional journey. So there doesn't always have to be like a big major change in order for a character to go through development. And I think this is what we see here with Gyun. Because we do see Gyun struggling. He's questioning himself, his moralities, and he questions the people around him because he just can't believe that people would be this cruel. And once we get to like the final fight between him and Sang-woo, I believe that Gyun was really struggling with his decision whether or not he wanted to kill Sang-woo, because he hadn't really made up his mind. I'm pretty sure that he was prepared to kill him if it came down to it, but in the end his struggle was so strong that his core principles came through and he was able to overcome the doubt that he had been experiencing. The final bet he makes with the old man is all about Gyun's core principle. Does he still trust people? And he does. After everything he's gone through, he refuses to let his views be tainted by the terrible experience he's made. And he truly believes that deep down, people can be good. I honestly didn't have any problems with the ending, apart from maybe Gyun's choice in hairstyle, but that's beside the point. Like, while none of the, like, twists or reveals or developments were that surprising to me, I think it makes sense from, like, a narrative standpoint. We see our main character dealing with the trauma of the Squid Game. We see how he lives through it, how he learns to cope with it. We find out who was responsible for the whole game in the first place, and we are teased with like an adventurous future for Gyun. So I honestly can't complain, and I think the final episode manages to conclude a very interesting series in a satisfying way. Well, this is it. Several minutes and literal hours later, we have managed to talk about every single episode of Squid Game, but naturally there is so much more you could talk about here. Like, I only scratch the surface by what I told you about here, and there are so many more analyses and videos, of course, out there that you can watch. I'll leave you a couple of links down in the description that will redirect you to videos that I have watched while working on my own script that I think were quite interesting and informing, so go and check those out if you want to catch some more interesting content for Squid Game. Okay, since this is the final bit I'm recording, I can tell that this whole thing, this whole script and putting everything together took so long. By the time I'm recording this last bit, the second season of Squid Game was announced. Like, it's gonna be a thing, which kind of rules the whole the creator didn't plan on having a second season spiel that I had going on throughout the script. And I mean, now that it's confirmed, I mean, I'll definitely watch it when it comes out, but I have to be honest, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I mean, I totally believe that Hwang can create another season of brilliant television. Like, he is a great writer and director, but I don't know, I just feel a little uneasy knowing that I'll be able to see what Gyun is actually gonna try and do in order to take out this, like, the Squid Game system. If that is what the second season is going to be about, I mean, most likely. And that we'll see who the frontman maybe really is, and who knows, maybe Detective Hwang is actually still alive. Like, who knows? I mean, I just don't know if I really need a second episode. You know, it just, you know, I'm naturally I'm willing to give it a try. And like I said, Detective Hwang. Yeah, see, that's the irritating thing. Creator Hwang is, I think, definitely going to be able to, like, make another great season of television. But, you know, just saying that I'm going to keep a close eye on the development there. Well, that's it from me. I've been keeping you for long enough, so I don't want to make this video any longer. Thank you so much for watching the whole thing. It took me such a long time to put all of this together. The whole script for this video was like over 30,000 words long, so I appreciate you listening to my voice for so long. If you enjoyed the analysis, I have a bunch of other video essays that you can watch right here if you're interested. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already done that, and I'll see all of you very soon. Goodbye.